Hey guys, tonight we are going to dive headfirst into a world of adventure, treasure, and truly, astonishingly terrible food. We're exploring why the diet during the Golden Age of Piracy was so notoriously awful. You might picture swashbuckling heroes, but the reality is, you probably wouldn't have lasted a week not because of a sword fight, but because you simply refused to eat what was on the menu. It was a culinary nightmare on the high seas. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel grow. And while you're at it, let me know down in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You're not on the ship yet. Not quite. The journey begins, as so many ill-advised adventures do. In a tavern, the air is thick, a heavy blanket woven from pipe smoke, spilled rum, and the damp, salty smell of the harbor just outside the door. This is a clean, respectable establishment. The floor is covered in a layer of sawdust and who knows what else, and the tables are dark wood, scarred with the names of sailors and pirates who have passed through, many of whom are probably at the bottom of the ocean now. You squeezed onto a bench between a man with a startlingly red beard and another who seems to be having a quiet, intense conversation with his tankard of ale. The noise is a constant, rolling wave, men laughing, shouting over one another, a distant fiddle playing a tune that is more energetic than it is accurate. This is the last bastion of civilization you see for a very long time, and you determined to make the most of it. In front of you, it's a wooden bowl, and inside is something you'll dream about for months to come. A hot, savory stew. There are chunks of what tastes like actual beef, not the salted, leathery mystery meat you've heard whispers about. You can see bits of carrot and onion, soft and sweet. A woman with tired eyes and a stained apron slaps a small loaf of bread onto the table next to your bowl. It is real bread. It is warm. You tear a piece off, and steam rises from the soft, white interior. You dip it into the gravy, and for a moment, everything feels right with the world. This meal is your anchor to land, your final taste of freshness. An old sailor across from you, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and sunspots, watches you eat with a knowing, slightly sad smile. Enjoy it while it lasts. Friend, he rasps, his voice like gravel. That is the last real bread you'll see for months. And that's too well. Treasure that memory. You nod, trying to savor every spoonful, committing the flavor to memory like a sacred text. As you eat, the man who has been recruiting you, the quartermaster, they call him, slides a piece of parchment across the sticky table. These are the ship's articles. It is a core part of pirate life, and every crew had their own version. This is the contract you sign before joining the voyage. You scan the handwritten rules. No fighting on board. Lights out at 8. Every man gets an equal share of the plunder, and compensation for injuries sustained in battle. So much for a lost arm, a little less for a lost eye. It is surprisingly democratic, a code of conduct for outlaws. Historians still debate just how much this supposed democracy was a reality versus a romantic ideal, questioning the true balance of power between a captain, his quartermaster, and a rowdy crew. Looking at the quartermaster's stern face, you get the sense he holds the real day-to-day power, not the flamboyant captain still holding court at the bar. He pushes a mug towards you. It is not ale. It is a concoction he calls bumbo. You take a cautious sip. It is rum, but it has been mixed with water, sugar, and a generous grating of nutmeg. It is sweet, strong, and surprisingly warming. This little-known drink was a favorite among pirates, perhaps a slightly more refined way to consume their daily ration of rum. It is far more pleasant than the raw, burning spirit. You finish your stew, wiping the bowl clean with the last of your bread. The warmth spreads through your stomach, a pleasant, heavy feeling of satisfaction. You take another long pull of the bumbo, the sweetness and spice lingering on your tongue. The quartermaster taps the articles with a thick finger. Time to make your mark. The tide is turning. You dip the offered coal into the inkpot. The tavern noise seems to fade into a dull roar. This is it, the final moment of choice. The smell of the stew, the soft bread, the sweet rum, it all feels like a deliberate, calculated farewell. You press the quill to the parchment, leaving your mark, and in doing so, you trade this warm, noisy tavern for the vast, unforgiving expanse of the sea. You push your chair back, feeling full and a little unsteady, and follow the quartermaster out into the cool, salty night air, towards the dark shape of the ship bobbing silently in the harbor. Your last good meal is over. The heavy, swaying motion of the deck is the first thing you notice. It is a living thing beneath your feet, a constant, gentle lurch that your land legs are not prepared for. The ship smells of things the tavern only hinted at. The sharp, medicinal scent of tar, the deep, damp odor of old wood, and a faint, unpleasant soreness rising from below decks, the smell of bilge water and unwashed bodies packed too tightly together. The cheerful noise of the port is gone, replaced by the rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers and the snap of canvas high above as the sails catch the wind. You ray moving. The journey has truly begun. For a few hours, you ray mostly occupied with staying upright and not getting in the way of the seasoned crew as they work the lines with an efficiency that seems almost choreographed. No one speaks to you. You ray just another new face, another body to fill a space on the watch roster. But as the sun begins to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the cook, a burly man with a magnificent beard and a ladle tucked into his belt, like a sword, starts distributing the evening meal. There is no stew. There are no bowls. He simply moves down the line of men, handing each one a slab of something flat, pale, and vaguely square. He gets to you and drops one into your waiting hands. It is surprisingly heavy and cool to the touch. You turn it over. It is a large, thick quacker, about half an inch thick and the color of pale dust. It is incredibly dense, more like a clay tile than anything you consider food. On its surface, you can just make out a faint stamp, a small crown or emblem, marking it as official naval supply. What is it? You ask the sailor next to you, a man with teeth stained brown from tobacco. He lets out a short, humorless laugh. Ship's biscuit, sea bread, hardtack, call it what you want. Dinner is what it is. You look down at the object again. It doesn't look like dinner. It looks like a building material. Still, hunger is beginning to gnaw at you. A hollow feeling that the memory of the taverns can no longer satisfy. You lift the biscuit to your mouth and, with a confidence you will later find hilarious, you try to take a bite. The sound is a dull, painful thud as your teeth meet the unyielding surface. A sharp pain shoots through your jaw. You haven't even made a dent. You try again, with the same result. It is, without exaggeration, as hard as rock. The sailor beside you is watching, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He takes his own biscuit and, with the handle of his knife, gives it a sharp rat. It doesn't break. He wraps it again, harder, and it finally cracks into a few smaller, jagged pieces. He gestures for you to do the same. You pull out the small knife you carry, turn it around, and smash the handle against your biscuit. It finally breaks, sending a shower of dry crumbs onto the deck. This is your introduction to the single most important food item of the Age of Sail. Hardtack was the answer to a simple, crucial problem: how to store carbohydrates for months or even years without them spoiling. The solution was to remove every last drop of moisture. It was just flour and water, maybe a little salt. Baked 2, sometimes even 4 times, until it was completely desiccated. This process made it incredibly durable and long-lasting, but also legendarily inedible in its natural state. Some historians and food archaeologists still argue about the subtle variations in the recipe. Was the extreme hardness a deliberate goal for maximum preservation? Or was it often just the side effect of using the cheapest flour and cutting corners on the baking process? Looking at this sorry piece of baked flour in your hand, you suspect it as the latter. Don't eat it like that. You'll break your teeth. The sailor advises. Seeing your struggle, he pops a jagged piece into his mouth and then takes a swig from a small flask. He points to your own hip, where the quartermaster made sure you had your own supply of grog watered down rum. Soften it up. You take his advice. You place a piece of the broken biscuit in your mouth. It tastes of nothing. It is like chewing on chalk. Then you take a swig of your grog. The harsh, sweet liquid washes over the biscuit. Then you hold it in your cheek, letting it soak. Slowly, grudgingly, the hardtack begins to yield. It doesn't become bread again. It transforms into a thick, gritty paste, a sort of flavorless, lumpy porridge in your mouth. You swallow it down. It is not pleasant. It is not satisfying. But it is, technically, sustenance. You repeat the process with the other pieces, dutifully turning your ration into a soggy pulp before swallowing. This was the sailor's staple, the foundation of his diet. A little known fact is that these biscuits were often called worm castles or devil's own nutshells by the men who had to eat them, for reasons you haven't discovered yet. But the names alone don't inspire confidence. For now, you just know that it fills the stomach in the most joyless way imaginable. As you finish your last piece, the memory of that warm, soft bread from the tavern feels like a cruel joke. That was food for people on land. This is fuel for a machine, and you are just one of the cogs. You stare out at the endless, darkening water, the bland, tasty taste of your first ship's meal lingering in your mouth, and you feel the true weight of the voyage ahead. A week passes, or maybe it is 2. Time starts to blur out here, marked only by the changing of the watch and the slow, relentless procession of meals. You've gotten used to the hardtack, or rather, you've gotten used to the process of eating hardtack, the dunking, the soaking, the mashing. It is a ritual, but today is different. Today is a meat day. A buzz of what you might generously call excitement ripples through the crew. It is a low, grumbling kind of anticipation. The cook and his mate have spent the morning wrestling a massive wooden cask from the hold. It is dark, almost black, encrusted with salt. With a heave and a grunt, they pry the lid off. The smell that wafts out is your first clue that this will not be the succulent beef stew from the tavern. It is an overpowering, eye-watering stench of pure, concentrated salt, with a funky, slightly sour undertone that you can't quite place. It is the smell of something that has been aggressively preserved against its will. The cook reaches into the barrel with a large iron hook and pulls out a slab of something. It has a purplish-brown color, streaked with veins of yellowish-white fat. It is rigid and looks more like a piece of gnarled wood than meat. He heaves it onto a thick, cutting board and begins to hack at it with a cleaver. The sound is not the soft slicing of flesh, but a hard, percussive thwack, 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 like he is chopping firewood. This is your introduction to salted meat, the other pillar of the naval diet. Just like with the hardtack, the principle was preservation. Fresh meat would rot in days. The solution: bury it in salt. Barrels were layered with salt. Then a layer of meat. Then more salt. Then more meat. Until the cask was full. Then a thick brine, a supersaturated saltwater solution was poured over the top to fill any remaining gaps. This process drew out all the moisture from the meat, making it an inhospitable environment for the bacteria that cause spoilage. It could last for years. The sailor next to you, the one who taught you the hardtack trick, leans in. They say the devil wouldn't eat the stuff unless you boiled it for a week. He mutters, and even then, he'd decomplain it as too salty. You get your portion. It has a small, tough-looking chunk of the stuff, swimming in a thin, greasy broth in your tin cup. The cook has boiled it for a few hours to try and didn't make it tender. He has failed on both counts. You spear a piece with your knife and lift it to your mouth. The salt hits you first. A chemical, burning intensity that makes your tongue curl. It is so salty, it is bitter. You chew, and chew, and chew. The meat is unbelievably tough. A dense mass of fibers that resists every effort of your jaw. It has the texture of leather and the flavor of a salt lick. There is a faint, gummy taste underneath it all, but it is completely overwhelmed by the salt. This is what passed for beef, or sometimes pork, and the quality was dubious from the start. Naval contractors were notoriously corrupt. They'd often use the oldest, toughest, cheapest cuts of meat imaginable, sometimes from animals that were already sick or dying. There are accounts of barrels being opened to reveal meat that had already turned green or black before it was even salted. The term for this kind of low-quality, often mystery meat was salt horse. A little-known and rather grim joke among sailors was that sometimes you could still see the brand of the horse on the hide. Whether that is literal truth or just gallows humor is lost to time. But it tells you everything you need to know about their confidence in the supply chain. As you struggle to swallow your first piece, you notice something else. The fat. It is not the soft, melting fat you're used to. It is waxy and hard, with a rancid, almost soapy taste. This is because the salting process doesn't preserve fat as well as it preserves muscle. Over months at sea, the fat would oxidize and go rancid, adding another layer of unpleasantness to an already challenging meal. Historians and food scientists are still fascinated by the sheer resilience of the human body that could survive on this diet. The main academic debate, IS&T, about whether the food was bad, everyone agrees on that, but rather how sailors' bodies adapted to the insane levels of sodium. Did they develop a tolerance, or were they just in a constant state of dehydration and kidney stress? Looking at the faces of the men around you, who are grimly chewing their salt horse as if it is the most normal thing in the world, you suspect the answer is a bit of both. They look weathered, hardened, and permanently thirsty. You finally manage to get through your portion. Washing each stuff. Salty bite down with a gulp of grog. The watered down rum helps to cut through the grease and salt, but it also makes you feel even more dehydrated. Your stomach feels heavy and bloated, and your mouth tastes like the bottom of a salt mine. You find yourself longing for the simple, bland purity of the hardtack. At least it didn't actively assault your senses. You look down at your empty tin cup, then out at the endless blue of the ocean. The promise of treasure and adventure suddenly feels very, very far away. Right now, you trade a chest of gold for a single, unslatted potato. The salt horse has left you with a raging, unquenchable thirst. It has a deep, primal need that claws at the back of your throat. Every swallow feels dry and scratchy, and your tongue feels thick and clumsy in your mouth. You think about water constantly, not the vast, undrinkable ocean that surrounds you, but a cool, clear stream, a deep well, or even just a cup of rainwater. The memory of fresh water becomes an obsession. You quickly learn that water on a ship is more precious than gold, more sought after than rum. It is the fragile thread upon which everyone's life hangs. Each man is allotted a daily ration, usually about a gallon, for both drinking and cooking. It sounds like a lot, but in the sweltering heat of the tropics, under a relentless sun, it is barely enough to keep dehydration at bay. The water is stored below decks in large wooden casks, much like the ones that held the salted meat. When the voyage begins, the water is fresh. For the first few days, it is the greatest luxury on board. You receive your ration in your tin cup, and it is cool and clean. You drink it slowly, reverently, letting it soothe the salt-parched tissues of your mouth and throat. It is a moment of pure, simple relief in a day filled with hardship. But this blissful state doesn't last. After a week at sea, you go to receive your ration and notice a change. The water is no longer clear. It has a faint, yellowish-green tinge, and there are small, slimy-looking things floating in it. The smell has changed, too. It no longer smells of nothing. It has a damp, stagnant, slightly vegetal odor, like a pond that hasn't seen fresh rain in a long time. This is the inevitable fate of water stored in wooden barrels. The wood itself isn't perfectly inert. It leaches compounds into the water, giving it a woody taste. More importantly, the barrels are not sterile. They are breeding grounds for algae, slime, and bacteria. The warmth of the ship as and the lack of circulation create the perfect environment for a miniature ecosystem to bloom inside your drinking supply. The ship's carpenter, a quiet man who seems to have a deeper understanding of the vessel than anyone else, explains it to you as he inspects the casks. It is the slime, he says, pointing a finger at the greenish film coating the inside of an empty barrel. Grows on the wood. No stopping it. As the second week bleeds into the third, the water goes from merely unpleasant to actively disgusting. It turns a darker green, almost opaque. The taste becomes foul. The bitter, swampy flavor that you have to force yourself to swallow. The texture becomes thick and viscous, and you can feel the slime coat your tongue as you drink. The crew has a name for it. Ropiness. The water becomes so thick with algae and bacterial growth that when you pour it, it can form long, cohesive, rope-like strands. It has a stomach-turning sight. To make it palatable, or at least to mask the taste and smell, the crew has developed a number of coping mechanisms. The most common is to simply mix it with their daily ration of rum to make grog. The strong flavor of the alcohol helps to overpower the swampy taste of the water. This, of course, is the official reason for the creation of grog by Admiral Vernon of the British Navy. The unofficial one, as every sailor knows, was to keep the men from getting too drunk on their nitro ration. A more peculiar and little-known trick you see some of the older sailors use involves a piece of cloth. Before drinking, They'll help or their ration through a handkerchief or a scrap of sailcloth. This acts as a crude filter, catching the larger bits of slime and algae. It doesn't do anything about the taste or the bacteria, but it at least removes the chunks. You adopt this practice immediately, and while the water still tastes vile, the psychological relief of not having to chew your drink is immense. Historians and maritime archaeologists still debate the specific types of microorganisms that thrived in these water casks. By analyzing residue from salvaged barrels, they try to identify the exact species of algae and bacteria. Was it just harmless pond scum? Or were they often breeding grounds for more dangerous pathogens like those that cause dysentery? The high frequency of intestinal ailments reported in ship S logs from the period suggests it was often the latter. The bloody flux, as they called dysentery, was a common and oft unfatal disease on long voyages. And the contaminated water supply was almost certainly the primary culprit. You learn to live with the thirst. You learn to ignore the taste of the water. You learn to filter out the green slime and pretend it as fine. But the fear of the water running out is a constant, low-level hum of anxiety in the back of your mind. You watch the sun beat down on the deck, feel the sweat trickle down your back, and you know that your survival depends entirely on those slimy, green-filled barrels below. You find yourself scanning the horizon not just for other ships or land, but for the dark, bruised look of a rain cloud. A rain squall, once a nuisance, is now a gift from heaven, a chance to catch a few precious mouthfuls of clean, pure water before it is tainted by the barrel and the slime. It has a stark lesson in the hierarchy of needs. Before glory, before gold, there is water, and yours is turning green. You've finally managed to stomach the salty, leather-like meat and the slimy, green water. You feel like you've adapted, that you've passed some kind of grim initiation into the life of a sailor. Then comes the day you learn the truth about the hardtack, the real truth. It is evening, the sun has set, and the only light on deck comes from a single, swaying lantern, casting long, dancing shadows. In the semi-darkness, the distribution of the nightly biscuit ration feels almost secretive. You take your slab of hardtack, find a relatively quiet corner, then prepare for the familiar ritual of breaking it apart and soaking it in your grog. As you bring the biscuit closer to your face in the dim, flickering light, you notice something odd. The surface is anti-smooth. It is riddled with tiny, dark holes. You've seen them before, but you'd always assumed they were just imperfections from the baking process, little air bubbles. But tonight, you see something move, a tiny, dark light, then another, wriggles out of one of the holes. You stare, frozen, your appetite vanishing in a wave of revulsion. The sailor who has become your reluctant mentor, the one with the tobacco-stained teeth, is sitting nearby. He sees the look on your face and chuckles. A low, rumbling sound. "Ugh," he says. You've finally met the biscuit test crew. He takes his own biscuit and holds it up to the lantern light. It is crawling with a small, black, beetle-like insects, no bigger than a grain of rice, with long, curved snouts, weevils, ethers, as if introducing you to a new shipmate, or maggots, if you were lucky, more meat on end. This is your formal introduction to the Cetophilus granarius, the grain weevil, or, as sailors more commonly knew them, the ship's biscuit weevil. These insects were an unavoidable part of life at sea. The long, slow voyages, then the massive quantities of stored grain products created the perfect breeding ground. The weevils would lay their eggs in the flour before it was even baked. The baking process would kill the live insects, but not the eggs. Then, sealed in the warm, dark, humid hold of a ship for months, the eggs would hatch. The larvae would eat their way through the biscuit from the inside out, growing and maturing into adult weevils, turning your primary food source into their personal nursery and condominium complex. You look down at your biscuit in horror. The thought of all the hardtack you've already eaten, all the pieces you've mashed into a paste in your mouth, flashes through your mind. How many of these passengers have you unknowingly consumed? The sailor sees your disgust and offers a piece of hard-won wisdom. That is why we call him worm castles, he says, and it is why old hands eat their biscuit in the dark. He demonstrates. He turns away from the lantern, taps his biscuit on the railing to break it up, and pops a piece into his mouth without looking at it. What you don't see, you don't have to think about. It is a simple, brilliant, and utterly disgusting solution. The presence of weevils was so common that they were often considered just another ingredient. In fact, a rather morbid but little-known piece of sailor lore claimed that the weevils were a good sign. The old saying went, "It is better to have weevils than no weevils, because when the weevils leave, the biscuit is to rot, uneven for them." It was a way of finding a silver lining in a truly repulsive situation. The insects were seen as a sort of quality control. Their presence meant the biscuit was, on some fundamental level, still edible. You, however, are not yet at the point where you can appreciate this grim logic. You can't bring yourself to eat it. You consider throwing it overboard, but the gnawing hunger in your stomach stops you. A full ration is a full ration, and wasting food is a serious offense. The sailor offers another technique. He takes his chunk of biscuit and dunks it into his tin mug of grog. A few seconds later, several black specks float to the surface. He calmly skims them off with his finger and flicks them onto the deck before drinking the grog and eating the now sodden biscuit. The alcohol, he explains, drives them out of their tunnels. Historians often discuss the nutritional deficiencies of a sailor's diet, focusing on things like scurvy, but there is an ongoing, and perhaps less appetizing, debate about the unintentional nutritional supplements. Did the constant, accidental consumption of weevils, maggots, and other insect larvae provide a small but crucial source of protein and B vitamins that was otherwise absent from the diet? Some food historians argue that this hidden protein might have staved off the worst effects of malnutrition for just a little bit longer. It is a strange and unsettling thought that these repulsive insects might have actually been helping you survive. You hesitate for a moment, then decide to try the dunking method. You drop your largest piece of biscuit into your own cup. The grog fizzes for a second, and then, just as he said, a half-dozen tiny black bodies pop to the surface, their legs twitching. Your stomach turns, but you steel yourself. You skim them off, trying not to look too closely, and then you eat the biscuit. It tastes the same as before, bland, crazy, soaked in rum, but now there is a new psychological dimension to the experience. Every bite is an act of willpower. You are eating something you know was, just moments ago, infested. As you finish your ration, you make a vow. From now on, you will eat your biscuit in the dark. It is a small surrender, an admission that some things are simply better left unseen. You have learned one of the most important survival skills on the high seas, the art of willful ignorance. You've settled into a routine, a grim, monotonous, predictable routine. The rhythm of the ship is the rhythm of your life, and the rhythm of your meals is the most predictable part of all. There are no surprises, no variation. No moments of culinary delight. There is only the schedule. The ship as cook. The big man with the ladle. Doesn't he need a cookbook? He doesn't need creativity. He just needs a calendar. The weekly menu is as fixed and unchangeable as the North Star. You learn it by heart within your first full week, and it haunts your waking thoughts and your dreams. Monday is salt beef day. You wake up knowing that your main meal will be a chunk of that tough, stringy, oversalted meat, boiled for hours, yet still retaining enough salt to mummify a cat. It is served with your ration of weevil-filled hardtack. You chew, you swallow, you drink your grog. That is Monday. Tuesday is salt pork day. It has a subtle variation. The meat is slightly paler, the fat more waxy and prone to rancidity. Sometimes it has a welcome change from the beef. Other times, the soapy taste of the oxidized pork fat is even worse. It is, of course, served with hardtack. You chew, you swallow, you drink your grog. That is Tuesday. Wednesday is often a pea day. This sounds promising, like a vegetable might be involved. The reality is less appealing. The cook hauls out a sack of dried peas, which are as hard as little pebbles. He boils them for hours in a giant copper pot, often using the same water the salt meat was boiled in to add a bit of flavor. The result is a thick, brownish-gray sludge known as peas pudding or peas pottage. It is bland, mushy, and has a slightly grainy texture. Some men love it, seeing it as a soft, comforting break from the endless chewing. Others hate it, finding the texture nauseating. It is served with, you guessed it, hardtack. Thursday as a repeat. Back to salt beef. The same barrel, the same cut, the same overwhelming saltness. The only difference between Thursday and Monday is your own slowly eroding morale. Friday brings another variation, often a fish day, but only if the ship as stores included salted cod or herring. This was more common on naval vessels than pirate ships, but when available, it offered a different kind of salt mise fishy, pungent flavor that permeated the entire deck. The dried, salted cod was as hard as a plank and had to be soaked for a day before being boiled into a flaky, chewy mass. It was a taste you either tolerated or despised. Saturday, it is back to the salt pork. And on Sunday, as a special treat, you might get a slightly larger ration of meat. Or perhaps the cook will attempt something ambitious, like a doughboy. This involves taking flour and suit the hard, rancid fats skimmed from the boiling meat and mixing them into a heavy, greasy dumpling, which is then boiled in the meat water until it has a pale, starchy lump. It is incredibly dense and sits in your stomach like a cannonball, but it is different, and for that, you are grudgingly grateful. This relentless cycle was the bedrock of naval logistics. It was designed for one purpose: to provide a predictable number of calories to keep a man working. The concept of nutrition, pleasure, or variety simply was an antipart of the equation. One little known aspect of the system was the strict accounting. The purser or quartermaster would weigh out every single ration. A pound of biscuit, a pound of meat per man, per day. This is why the phrase "to be in a pickle" might have a nautical origin, referring to the salted meat preserved in brine. But it is also where we get the term "to get 1 pound of flesh," from the strict, non-negotiable nature of the meat ration. The psychological toll of this monotony is palpable. You see it in the men's eyes. There is a listlessness, a joylessness that sets in. Food is no longer a source of comfort or community. It is a chore. It is fuel. The conversations at mealtimes are brief and functional. There is no savoring. No discussion of the food beyond a routine grumble. Historians have long documented these official rations, but there is a debate that simmers beneath the surface. Just how strictly were these menus followed, especially on a pirate ship? On a navy vessel, the rules were ironclad, but on a pirate ship, with its more chaotic and supposedly democratic structure, was there more room for improvisation? Did a successful raid mean a feast for a week, completely upending the schedule? Or did the inherent difficulty of storing fresh food mean that even pirates, flush with stolen goods, would inevitably fall back on the same miserable rotation of salt meat and hardtack? The evidence suggests that while they might enjoy a captured cargo of sugar or wine, the fundamental, day-to-day reality was likely just as bleak. The sea was a great equalizer, and it imposed its own harsh dietary laws on everyone. You find yourself daydreaming about food, not grand feasts, but simple things. A fresh apple, a piece of cheese that doesn't taste like soap, a boiled egg. These simple fantasies become more vivid and more powerful than any dream of treasure. You mark the passage of time by meals. You finish your Tuesday salt pork and think, okay, for more days until the next doughboy. It is a small, sad thing to look forward to, but it is something. The menu is your prison, a 7-day cycle of salt and sorrow, and all you can do is endure it, one joyless, repetitive meal at a time. In the center of this grim culinary universe stands a single, vital figure, the ship's cook. You might expect him to be a despised man, the target of all the crew as food-related frustrations. But the reality is far more complex. The cook on a pirate or naval ship was a unique and oft unrespected character, a blend of magician, craftsman, and survivalist. Your ship's cook is a man named Silas. He fits the stereotype perfectly. He has one leg, having lost the other to a cannonball years ago, and he moves around his cramped galley with a surprising agility, leaning on a worn wooden crutch. He also has a spectacular collection of burns and scars on his arms, a testament to years of working with boiling cauldrons on a constantly moving surface. The crew calls him Doctor, a common nickname for ship's cooks, a bit of gallows humor referencing the fact that his cooking was just as likely to make you sick as the ship's surgeon's remedies. His domain is a small, smoky alcove on the deck, barely big enough for one man to stand in. The centerpiece is a brick hearth, the firebox carefully insulated with layers of sand to prevent it from setting the entire ship ablaze. On top of this hearth, it's his pride and joy, a single, enormous copper cauldron. This cauldron is his only major piece of equipment. Everything gets cooked in it. The salt beef, the peas pudding, the doughboys, even the water for the grog is heated in it. It is scrubbed out with sand and salt water between uses. But the faint, ghostly flavors of every meal ever cooked in it seem to linger, creating a unique, ever-evolving ship's broth. Watching him work is a lesson in efficiency and adaptation. Cooking on land is one thing. Cooking on a ship that is pitching and rolling violently in a storm is another. The hearth is designed with high walls to keep the fire contained. The cauldron has a heavy lid that can be latched down. Silas has learned to brace himself against the roll of the ship, moving in sync with the waves. He chops vegetables on a board with a raised edge to stop them from sliding onto the deck, and he uses a long-handled ladle to stir the contents of the pot, keeping his face and arms as far from the sloshing, boiling liquid as possible. Despite the appalling quality of his ingredients, Silas takes a certain pride in his work. He is the one who knows the exact moment to skim the scummy gray foam off the boiling salt meat. He knows how to mix the flour and suet for the doughboys to just the right consistency so they don't dissolve into a greasy soup. He is in his own way, a master of his craft, the craft of making the inedible barely edible. One of the most important and little-known roles of the cook was as the guardian of the fat. After boiling the salted meat, a thick layer of grease and fat would float to the top. This was not thrown away. It was a precious resource. Silas would carefully skim it off and store it in a special barrel. This rendered fat, known as slush, was a vital part of the ship's economy. It was used to grease the mast and rigging, to waterproof leather, and as fuel for crude lamps. This leads to a fascinating, though still debated, part of pirate economics, the slush fund. While today the term means a reserve of money for illicit purposes, some historians argue it originated here. The cook often had the right to sell this slush when the ship was in port, giving him his own private source of income, his personal slush fund. It was a perk of a dangerous and thankless job. The position of cook was often given to a man who was no longer fit for the strenuous duty of a regular seaman, typically someone who had been injured in a previous battle. That's why the image of the one-legged cook, like Long John Silver in Treasure Island, is so persistent. It was based in a certain reality, but this led to a point of contention that historians still discuss. Did this practice mean the cook was a lesser crew member? Or was his essential role and survival recognized as equally important? On a pirate ship, where every man had a vote, the cook's position was usually protected. An unhappy crew might overthrow a captain, but they'd think twice before angering the one man who knew how to make the peas pudding properly. One afternoon, you see a few of the men bring Silas a small turtle they managed to catch. A wave of genuine excitement passes through the crew. This is a break from the routine, a chance for fresh meat. You watch as Silas, with the focus of a surgeon, expertly butchers the turtle. He wastes nothing. The meat is set aside for a stew. The liver and organs are fried up as a special treat for the men who caught it, and the fat is rendered down. Even the shell will be cleaned and used as a bowl or a decorative item. That evening, for the first time in weeks, you eat something that tastes like real food. The turtle stew is rich and savory. Silas has somehow found a few wizened onions and wild herbs from the last port of call to add to the cauldron. It is not the stew from the tavern, but it is a universe away from salt horse. As you eat, you look over at Silas, who is watching the crew devour his creation with a rare, small smile on his face. In that moment, he is not just a disabled sailor. He is a magician. He is the alchemist who, for one precious evening, has managed to turn suffering into sustenance, and even a little bit of joy. After the brief, glorious respite of the turtle stew, it is back to the soul-crushing monotony of the regular rations. One morning, as a sad accompaniment to your breakfast of hardtack and grog, the cookess may distribute something that is, in theory, a delicacy. Cheese. You get your portion. It is a small, hard, waxy wedge, about the size of your thumb. The color is a deep, unsettling or inch-browned, and it is coated in a dry, cracked rind that looks more like tree bark than part of a food item. The smell hits you next. It is not the pleasant, earthy aroma of a good cheddar or the sharp tang of a parmesan. It is a powerful, acrid, nose-burning stench, like old socks that have been soaked in ammonia. It is a smell that screams, I have been on this ship for a very, very long time. This is ship-ass cheese. Like everything else, it was chosen for its durability, not its flavor. The types of cheese loaded onto ships were incredibly hard, dry, and low in moisture, like a Cheshire or a Gloucester. When fresh, they were probably quite tasty. But after months in the ship's hold, exposed to fluctuating temperatures, humidity, and the company of rats, they underwent a transformation. They would sweat out their remaining fat content, which would then go rancid on the surface. They would dry out until they were hard enough to be used as a doorstop, and the flavor would concentrate and intensify, becoming overwhelmingly sharp and pungent. You watch as an older sailor next to you prepares to eat his. He doesn't just bite into it. He pulls out his knife and begins to meticulously scrape off the outer rind, a thick layer of brownish, crumbly material. He flicks it overboard. Never eat the coat. He advises you, without looking up. That is where the devil keeps his bitterness. You follow his lead, using your own knife to shave away the dark, hard exterior. The cheese underneath is slightly softer, but still incredibly firm. You take a tiny, hesitant bite. The flavor is a shocking explosion in your mouth. It is intensely salty. Of course, everything on this ship is salty, but there is also a powerful, biting sharpness that makes your eyes water. It is acidic and sour, with a deep, funky, almost chemical aftertaste that lingers long after you've swallowed. It is less a food and more a chemical weapon. As if the cheese were empty enough, you may also give in your ration of butter. It comes in a small wooden firkin, and the cook-ass mate scoops out a dollop for each man. It is not the creamy, pale yellow substance you know. It is a greasy, translucent, orange-colored smear. It has the consistency of axle grease and smells even worse than the cheese or rancid, sour milk odor that is truly stomach-turning. This was the fate of butter on long voyages. Without refrigeration, the milk solids would separate and spoil. The fats would oxidize, and it would essentially rot. It was often so foul that sailors cowed and bear to eat it. A little known but common practice was for sailors to use their butter ration not as food, but as a water repellent, coating for their boots, or as a salve for sores and boils. They found it more useful as a piece of equipment than as a source of calories. Watching a man grease his boots with his breakfast is a sight you won't soon forget. The degradation of these dairy products was so predictable that naval victualling supply contracts had clauses for it. The quality of butter and cheese was a constant source of complaint and corruption. Suppliers would use the cheapest, lowest quality milk, add fillers, and use insufficient salt for preservation, knowing that by the time the crew opened the barrel months later, it would be impossible to tell if the product was bad because it was poorly made or because it had simply spoiled at sea. This is a topic historians of logistics love to dig into. The fine print in these centuries-old contracts. The debate is often whether the suppliers were deliberately fraudulent or if the science of food preservation was just so poorly understood that spoilage was seen as an unavoidable cost of business. Given the profit margins involved, you suspect a healthy dose of both. You try to eat your cheese. You find that if you take a tiny nibble and immediately follow it with a large chunk of hardtack, the blandness of the biscuit helps to dilute the cheese's aggressive flavor. It is a battle of attrition. You can't bring yourself to even touch the butter. You see some men mixing it with their peas pudding, trying to add some richness, but you decide to go without. You look at the wedge of cheese in your hand. It is a perfect metaphor for your life at sea. It started as something good, something from the land, a product of care and craft. But time and the harsh realities of this environment have twisted it into a hard, bitter, barely recognizable version of its former self. You feel a strange kinship with the cheese. You, too, feel like you are being slowly preserved and degraded by the salt, the sea, and the endless, monotonous days. You take one last, painful bite, and vow to use the rest to try and waterproof a hole in your shoe. It seems like a much better use for it. Weeks turn into a month. Then 2. The terrible food. The bad water. The weevils you've learned to endure them all. But now, a new and far more sinister threat begins to creep through the ship. It doesn't announce itself with a storm or a battle. It starts quietly, subtly, inside your own body. It begins with a feeling of profound exhaustion, not the normal tiredness after a long watch, but a deep, bone-weary lethargy that sleep doesn't seem to touch. Your muscles ache. Your joints feel swollen and tender, especially your knees and ankles. You feel irritable and weak, and the thought of climbing the rigging feels like an impossible task. At first, you and the other men dismiss it as just the strain of the voyage. But then other symptoms appear. You notice your gums have become soft and spongy. When you chew your hardtack, they bleed, leaving a coppery taste in your mouth. Small, strange bruises, like dark purplish-blue spots, begin to appear on your legs and arms, even without any injury. Old scars, ones that have been healed for years, start to ache and sometimes even reopen, turning a strange, angry color. This is the slow, insidious onset of scurvy, the scourge of the seas. It was the single greatest killer of sailors in the age of sail, responsible for more deaths than storms, shipwrecks, and naval combat combined, and its cause was a complete mystery to the people of the time. They blamed it on everything from bad air and dampness to laziness and a lack of moral character. The real cause, as we now know, was a catastrophic deficiency of vitamin C ascorbic acid. The human body cannot produce or store vitamin C, which is essential for synthesizing collagen, the protein that holds our bodies together. It has the glue for our skin, blood vessels, bones, and cartilage. Without it, the body literally starts to fall apart from the inside out. The diet of hardtack, salted meat, and rancid cheese contained virtually zero vitamin C. After 6 to 8 weeks at sea, a sailor's internal reserves would be completely depleted, and the symptoms would begin. You see the effects all around you, then become too weak to work. Their teeth, no longer held securely in their decaying gums, become loose and eventually fall out. Their breath becomes horrendously foul. Their legs swell up, becoming hardened black, and they cry out in pain at the slightest touch. It is a slow, agonizing process of decay, and the psychological toll is just as devastating as the physical one. Men become deeply depressed, listless, and overcome with a sense of utter hopelessness. The ship's surgeon, who is also the barber, has no effective cures. He tries his traditional remedies, bloodletting, which only makes the weak men weaker, and prescribing concoctions of mercury, which adds poisoning to their list of ailments. One little known and truly desperate cure that was sometimes attempted was the earth bath. A sailor in the advanced stages of scurvy would be taken ashore, if land was near, and buried up to his neck in fresh soil. The belief was that the vapors from the earth would draw out the disease. It was, of course, completely useless, but it shows the sheer desperation and lack of understanding they faced. This is where you truly understand the value of a phrase you've heard before. Limmy. While the term is now a sometimes derogatory slang for a British person, its origin is a landmark in medical history. In 1747, a Scottish naval surgeon named James Lind conducted one of the first controlled clinical trials in history. He took 12 sailors with scurvy and divided them into 6 pairs. He gave each pair a different supplement to their diet: cider, sulfuric acid, vinegar, seawater, a mix of spices, and, most importantly, 2 oranges and 1 lemon per day. The results were dramatic and immediate. The pair receiving the citrus fruits made a miraculous recovery. Lind had found the cure, but in a perfect example of institutional inertia. The British Navy took nearly 50 years to make lemon or lime juice a mandatory part of a sailor's ration. The reasons for this delay are still a subject of intense academic debate. Was it bureaucratic incompetence, the high cost of citrus fruits, or a stubborn refusal by old-school physicians to accept such a simple, food-based cure over their complex medical theories? Whatever the reason, millions of sailors suffered and died needlessly during that half-century. On your pirate ship, you have no James Lind. You have only superstition and fear. The captain knows that scurvy can cripple his crew and render his ship helpless. The hunt for fresh food is no longer about pleasure or variety. It is about survival. The men talk obsessively about green things, about fruits and vegetables, with a desperate longing. The dream is no longer just of an apple, but of a single leaf of lettuce, a sour lemon, anything that grows from the ground. You look at your own bleeding gums in a small, polished piece of metal that serves as a mirror. You press on the dark bruises on your shins and feel a dull, terrifying ache. The fear of scurvy is worse than the fear of a naval patrol. A cannonball is a quick, clean death. This is a slow, prided, internal collapse. You are rotting from the inside out, and the only cure in the world is a piece of fruit, something you can't have. The vast, empty ocean has never felt more like a prison. The specter of scurvy hangs over the ship like a shroud, and the mood has turned dark and fearful. The lethargy and weakness are spreading. In this atmosphere of decay and desperation, one substance becomes more important than ever. Rum. You've been drinking it since you came aboard, mixed with the slimy water to make grog. But now, its role on the ship has evolved. It is no longer just a way to make the water palatable or a simple daily ration. It has become the ship's lifeblood, a multi-purpose tool that serves as currency, medicine, and the primary engine of morale. Every sailor, pirate or otherwise, was entitled to a daily ration of spirits. On a British naval vessel, this was famously a pint of rum per day, later diluted into half-pint servings of grog. Pirate articles often stipulated similar amounts, sometimes even more generous ones. This ration was considered an essential part of a sailor's compensation, as vital as his share of the plunder. To deny a man his rum was to invite mutiny. You see its power every day. In the morning, a sip of grog helps a man face the dreary prospect of another day of salt horse and hardtack. It puts a temporary fire in his belly, a fleeting warmth that masks the aches of scurvy and the chill of the sea breeze. After a grueling watch, in the howling wind and dream, the cup of grog is a reward, a moment of punctuation in the endless monotony. It loosens tongues, encourages camaraderie, and fosters the singing of sea shanties that help pass the miserable hours. But rum is also the ship's primary anesthetic and antiseptic. When a man gets a deep gash from a slipped rope or a splinter from a decaying deck board, the surgeon doesn't just reach for a bandage. The first step is to pour raw, burning rum directly into the wound. You hear the man's sharp intake of breath, a hissed curse of pain, but everyone knows it is necessary to cleanse the injury. Before any crude surgery, lancing a boil, setting a broken bone, or worse, the patient is given as much rum as he can drink, hoping to render him insensible to the agony that is to follow. You see men, their eyes wide with fear and pain, gratefully accepting the bottle. It is also a form of currency. Men gamble with their rum rations. A man skilled with a needle might mend a shipmate's shirt in exchange for a half gill of his rum. If a particularly unpleasant job needs doing, like cleaning the bilge, the captain might offer an extra ration of rum as an incentive. It has a liquid economy, understood by everyone. Eamon's wealth can be measured by how much of his ration he has managed to save or win. A little-known fact about the rum of this era is that it was not the smooth, aged, spiced spirit you might find today. The rum consumed on these ships was often a raw, harsh, young distillate, sometimes called kill devil. It was potent, then fiery, produced cheaply and quickly in the sugar plantations of the Caribbean. Its high alcohol content was its main selling point, making it easy to transport and effective at getting the job done. Whether that job was sterilizing a wound or numbing a man's despair, the central role of rum in shipboard life is well documented, but historians still debate its overall effect. Was it a necessary tool for maintaining order and morale in an incredibly harsh environment? Or was it a primary cause of the indiscipline, violence, and accidents that were so common on ships? The evidence points to both. The same rum that encouraged a rousing sea shanty could also fuel a drunken brawl that ended with knives being drawn. The same grog that steadied a man's nerves before a battle could also make his hands clumsy on the rigging, leading to a fatal fall. It was a double-edged sword, a source of both comfort and chaos. You see this duality firsthand. One evening, two men, their faces flushed with grog, get into a furious argument over a dropped tool. Insults fly, and for a moment, it looks like it will come to blows. A serious violation of the ship's articles. The quartermaster, a man who rarely raises his voice, intervenes. He doesn't shout. He simply orders the cook to withhold the two men's rum ration for the next day. The threat is instantly effective. The men fall silent, their anger evaporating in the face of a punishment they consider truly severe. They would rather take a flogging than lose their rum. Later that night, another sailor, a young man racked with the later stages of scurvy, is crying out in his hammock, his joints swollen and agonizingly painful. The surgeon, having exhausted his useless remedies, quietly pours a generous measure of raw rum into a cup and helps the boy drink it. The spirit doesn't cure him, but it dulls the sharp edges of his suffering, allowing him a few precious hours of restless, drunken sleep. You take your own evening ration of grog, the familiar taste of rum, lime, sugar, and stagnant water on your tongue. It is not a pleasure. It is a necessity. It is the oil that keeps the rusty, creaking machinery of this ship running. It is a painkiller, a paycheck, and a poison, all in one cup. You drink it down, feeling the familiar, deceptive warmth spread through your chest, and for a little while, you can almost forget the taste of blood in your mouth. The ship has become a microcosm of suffering. Scurvy is weakening the crew. Morale is low, and the food supplies are dwindling and becoming more rotten by the day. In this environment of scarcity, you start to notice the ship as other inhabitants, the ones who don't work, don't take a watch, and don't have a rum ration, but who are always there, scurrying in the shadows. The rats, they are everywhere. You hear them that night, the faint scratching and scrabbling sounds inside the walls of the hull. You see them out of the corner of your eye, a dark shape darting along the beam, the sleek body disappearing into the darkness of the hold. They are bold and fearless, made confident by their sheer numbers and the endless supply of food. The ship is their world, a floating pantry, and they are its masters. They get into everything. They chew through sacks of flour and dried peas, leaving behind a trail of filth. They gnaw on the edges of the hardtack, their sharp little teeth succeeding where yours failed. They even chew on the sails, the ropes, and the leather fittings, causing constant, low-level damage that the crew must always be repairing. The ship is in a perpetual state of war with its rodent population. The crew's feelings towards the rats are a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. They are a pestilence, a symbol of the filth and decay of life at sea. But they are also survivors, thriving in an environment that is slowly killing the men. There is a grim irony in the fact that the rats, feasting on the same biscuit and grain as the sailors, never get scurvy. Unlike humans, most animals can produce their own vitamin C. The rats are a constant, healthy, mocking presence, a reminder of the crew's own biological failings. Combating them is a daily chore. The ship likely has a cat or two, prized not for companionship but for their predatory skills. These ship-esque cats are lean, mean, and semi-feral, and a good mouser is considered an invaluable member of the crew. Some sailors also have terriers, small, tenacious dogs bred for rat catching. But even the most diligent animals can only make a small dent in a population that numbers in the hundreds, or even thousands. As the voyage drags on and the official rations become more and more scarce, a dark thought begins to enter the conversations of the crew. It is whispered at first, a grim joke made in the dead of night. But as hunger sharpens, the joke starts to sound more like a serious proposition. The rats, so long a pest, start to look like a source of fresh meat. This is a culinary line that no one wants to cross. But the desperation of the high seas has a way of erasing such lines. The idea of eating a rat is repulsive. They are creatures of filth, associated with disease and decay. But they are also flesh and blood. They are a source of protein that isn't saturated with salt or riddled with weevils. The first time you see it happen, it is done discreetly. A few of the most desperate men have set simple traps in the hold. One morning, they emerge with 2 freshly killed rats. The cook, Cyrus, looks at the offering with a deep sigh, his face a mask of weary resignation. He takes them without a word. There is no grand announcement. He skins and guts them, then adds the small carcasses to the day's peas pudding, letting them boil away until the meat falls off the bones. When the meal is served, no one says anything that everyone knows. The grayish sludge of the pudding has a slightly richer, Gamire flavor. Tiny, unit unfightable shreds of meat are mixed in with the peas. You eat your portion, trying not to think about its origins. It is a profound psychological barrier to overcome. You are eating the vermin that infest your floating prison. The consumption of rats on long voyages is a well-attested historical fact, the one that sailors were not proud of. It was a mark of true desperation. A strange and little-known piece of maritime lore is that different types of shipboard rats were considered more or less palatable. The common black rat was standard fare, but the larger, more aggressive brown rat, often called an Orway rat, was considered tougher and less tasty. There are even accounts, their veracity still debated by historians, of sailors paying a premium for rats caught in the flour storage, believing them to be cleaner than those caught in the bilge. It is a grim example of connoisseurship born of starvation. This practice exists in a historical gray area. Official naval records almost never mention it. It was part of the unwritten, unofficial reality of life at sea, a survival strategy that was best left undocumented. The debate among historians is not if it happened, but how common it was. Was it a last resort, only occurring on the most disastrous voyages? Or was it a more routine, if unspoken, supplement to the diet on many long journeys. The gallows humor and folklore surrounding it suggest it was more common than the official narratives let on. You force yourself to swallow another spoonful of the peas pudding. The meat is stringy and has a slightly sweet, unpleasant taste, but it is undeniably fresh. It hasn't been salted or preserved. Your body, starved for any kind of real nutrient, craves it even as your mind rebels. You feel a sense of shame, of having sunk to a new low, but you also feel a flicker of the primal satisfaction of survival. You are doing what needs to be done to stay alive. You look around at the other men, their faces grimly focused on their bowls. No one meets your eye. This is a shared secret, a collective degradation that no one wants to acknowledge. You have crossed another line. You have eaten the rats. And as you finish your meal, you can still hear them, scratching and scurrying in the dark. And you no longer just hear a pest. You hear a potential future meal. Just when you think you can't endure another day of the soul-crushing diet and the creeping dread of scurvy, a cry comes from the lookout, perched high up on the mast. Land ho! The two words are electric. They jolt the entire ship to life. Men who have been slumped in a lethargic stupor for weeks suddenly find a new source of energy. They scramble to the railings, their eyes straining to see the hazy, dark line on the horizon. For the first time in months, you see genuine, unadulterated hope on the faces of your shipmates. Land doesn't just mean a respite from the constant motion of the sea. It means fresh water. It means fresh food. It means salvation. As the ship draws closer, the hazy line resolves into a lush, green island, a jewel of impossible vibrancy in the vast blue desert of the ocean. You can smell it before you can clearly see the details, the scent of damp earth, of living plants, of flowers. It has the most beautiful smell you have ever encountered. The memory of the taverns, too, which once seemed like the pinnacle of culinary experience, now pales in comparison to the simple promise of a piece of fruit. The anchor drops in a calm, turquoise bay. The longboats are lowered, and you are part of the first shore party. Your feet hit the soft, white sand of the beach, and the sensation of solid, unmoving ground is so strange that you nearly stumble. You dig your fingers into the sand. It is real. The quartermaster organizes the shore party with ruthless efficiency. The first priority is water. The empty casks are rolled ashore and taken to a stream that tumbles down from the island's volcanic hills. You cup your hands and drink directly from it. The water is cool, clear, and sweet. It has no taste, which is the most wonderful taste in the world. It has a pleasure so intense it is almost painful. You drink until your stomach hurts, flushing out the weeks of slime and salt. The second priority is food. The men fan out into the jungle, the wild, chaotic explosion of green. And there, hanging from the trees in unbelievable abundance, is the cure for all your ailments. You see bananas, green and yellow. You see the heavy, drooping globes of mangoes. You see strange, star-shaped fruits you don't recognize. And small, citrus-like globes that you know instinctively are more valuable than any gold. You pick a fruit, a mango, and bite into it. The skin is tough, but the flesh inside is a burst of pure, unadulterated sweetness and juice. It has a flavor so intense, so vibrant, so alive, that it feels like a religious experience. The juice runs down your chin and onto your shirt, and you don't care. You eat another, and then another. It is not just food, it is medicine. You can almost feel the vitamin C coursing through your veins, beginning the slow, miraculous work of knitting your body back together. The men are like children in a candy store. They gorge themselves on fruits and coconuts, their faces lit with a kind of ecstatic joy. The sound of happy, messy eating replaces the grim, silent chewing of mealtimes on the ship. For a few hours, you are not pirates or sailors. You are just hungry men, rediscovering one of life's simplest and most profound pleasures. A little-known aspect of these shore visits was the careful foraging required. While many tropical islands were paradises of edible plants, many also harbored fruits and roots that were poisonous. A classic example is the manch-Denial tree, found in the Caribbean, whose fruit resembles a small apple but is dangerously toxic. A single bite could cause blistering in the mouth and throat, and contact with its sap could cause severe skin burns. Sailors had to learn, often through painful trial and error or by observing local animals, which plants were safe and which were deadly. The ship's surgeon or an experienced older sailor often lead the foraging parties, his knowledge of botany being a life-saving skill. Historians often focus on the major events of a pirate's life: the battles, the captures, the maroonings, but there is a growing appreciation for the importance of these seemingly mundane moments of resupply. The debate isn't whether they happened, but how much they dictated pirate strategy. Did pirates choose their hunting grounds and patrol routes based not just on shipping lanes, but on the proximity of islands known for good water, fruit, and game? It is likely that a pirate's mental map of the Caribbean was as much a grocery list as it was a treasure map. The foraging party brings back more than just fruit. They find wild yams and other starchy roots. They collect the eggs of nesting seabirds. They hunt wild pigs, descendants of animals left by previous ships. That night, on the beach, under the stars, you have a feast. The cook, Silas, is in his element. He has a roaring fire, fresh ingredients, and a crew that looks at him with genuine adoration. He roasts the pork on a spit. He boils the yams. He creates a massive, glorious stew filled with everything the island has offered. Use it on the sand. A plate of hot, roasted meat and soft, sweet yams in your lap. You drink fresh water from a coconut shell. The air is filled with the sizzle of the fire and the happy chatter of the crew. The ship, anchored a few hundred yards offshore, looks like a distant memory, a bad dream. This is real. The feel of the warm sand, the taste of the fresh food, the scent of the wood smoke. It is a moment of perfect, profound contentment. You know it won't last. Soon you will all be back on the ship, back to the Sultan Durat. But for now, you are saved. You have reached paradise, and it tastes like a mango. The feast on the beach has revitalized the crew. The lethargy of scurvy is beginning to recede, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. But the captain and the quartermaster know that the benefits of fresh fruit are fleeting. They cannot be preserved. To truly stock the larder for the next leg of the voyage, they need a source of fresh meat that will last longer than a few days. They need what sailors call living provisions. They need turtles. The next morning, a specialized hunting party is formed. They aren't looking for wild pigs in the jungle. They ray heading for the sandy coves and beaches on the other side of the island. This is where the sea turtles come ashore to lay their eggs. To the sailors of the 17th and 18th centuries, these creatures were not the protected species we think of today. They were a godsend, a walking, breathing solution to their most pressing problem. You join the hunting party, armed not with swords or muskets, but with ropes and brute strength. The lead hunter, an old sailor with skin like in leather, explains the process. The hunt happens at night or in the very early morning, when the large female turtles have hauled themselves out of the water and are distracted by their nesting duties. You find one almost immediately a massive green sea turtle, easily weighing 300 or 400 pounds. She is a magnificent, ancient-looking creature, her movements slow and deliberate as she digs a nest in the sand with her powerful flippers. There's a moment of quiet reverence for the animal, but that moment is brief. Survival is a ruthless business. The hunters wait for the opportune moment. Then, with a coordinated shout, they rush forward. The goal is not to harm the turtle, but to flip it onto its back. It is a struggle. The turtle is immensely powerful, its flippers sending sand flying as it tries to escape back to the sea. But there are 6 of you. You grab the edge of her heavy shell, dig your feet into the sand, and heave with all your might. With a great, collective grunt, you manage to roll her over. Once on her back, the great turtle is helpless. Her flippers wave uselessly in the air. She can't see right herself. She is now a prisoner. The process is repeated several times until you have half a dozen turtles lying on their backs along the beach, their dark eyes blinking slowly in the morning sun. It feels both ingenious and cruel. This was the turtle's great evolutionary advantage turned against it. Its heavy, protective shell, so effective against marine predators, made it incredibly vulnerable on land, and its ability to survive for long periods without food or water made it the perfect shipboard pantry. This is one of the more gruesome but little-known facts of Xingshan. The turtles were not killed and butchered on the beach. They were taken back to the ship alive. The longboats are brought ashore, and the real work begins. The turtles are lashed to heavy planks and, with immense effort, carried and dragged to the water's edge and loaded onto the boats. Back at the ship, they are hauled onto the deck and simply left there, lying on their backs in a designated, shaded spot. There they will stay, sometimes for weeks, or even months. They require no care, no food, no water. Their slow metabolism allows them to survive in this state for an astonishingly long time. They are, in effect, a self-contained, living supply of fresh meat. Whenever the cook needs to make a fresh stew, he simply goes to the row of overturned turtles, selects one, and butchers it. This provided the crew with a vital source of protein and fat, free from the taint of salt or rot. Long after the fresh fruits from the island were gone, the ethics of this practice are, to a modern mind, horrifying, but to a 17th century sailor, it was a miracle of logistics. The historical debate arises about the morality of the practice, which is viewed through a very different lens today, but about its ecological impact. Some historians argue that the intensive harvesting of sea turtles by pirates, navies, and merchant ships over several centuries was a major contributing factor to the dramatic decline in their populations in the Caribbean and Atlantic. The turtles, once unbelievably abundant, were literally eaten into near extinction. You look at the row of helpless, overturned turtles on the deck. It is a strange and unsettling sight. They are a symbol of both life and death. Their presence means you will eat well for the foreseeable future. It means the threat of scurvy, while not gone, is held at bay for a while longer. The turtle soup, or kale pea, made from the fatty cartilage of the belly, was considered a great delicacy and was thought to be particularly restorative for the sick. But it is also a constant, living reminder of the brutal calculus of survival at sea. You are kept alive by the slow, patient suffering of these creatures. You hear them sometimes, a deep, sighing sound, a slow exhalation of breath. It is a sound that will stick with you. The treasure of this island, isn't gold buried in a chest. It is the living, breathing meat that you've stacked on your deck. A larder of misery that will keep you sailing and keep you alive on the long, hard journey ahead. Life on board has improved dramatically since the stop at the island. The fresh water, the memory of the fruit, and the presence of the live turtles have banished the immediate fear of scurvy and starvation. A sense of optimism, however fragile, has returned to the crew. But the long, empty days of sailing remain. The ship plows through an endless expanse of blue, and with the primary drives of hunger and thirst temporarily sated, a new enemy emerges. Boredom, the routine of watch standing, sleeping, and mending ropes quickly becomes a tedious grind. The men, restless and full of the energy that fresh food provides, need a diversion. Fights and arguments become more frequent over trivial matters. The quartermaster can't simply punish everyone. He needs to channel their energy. And so, the fishing lines come out. Fishing on the high seas is not just a leisure activity. It is a practical and often necessary supplement to the ship's diet. It is a game of chance, a lottery drawn from the depths of the ocean, and the entire crew gets invested in the outcome. The equipment is simple. Long, thick lines of hemp or cotton, baited with whatever is available: a scrap of salt pork fat, a piece of shiny metal, or a colorful rag tied to a hook. The men cast these lines from the stern or the sides of the ship, letting them trail in the vessel's wake. Then, they wait. For hours, nothing might happen. The lines trail limply in the churning water. The men swap stories, sing shanties, or simply stare out at the horizon, lost in their own thoughts. The act of fishing itself is a meditation, a welcome break from the ship's rigid duties. It is a moment of quiet hope. Then, a shout goes up. Fish on. A line goes taut, singing with tension. The man holding it digs in his heels, his knuckles white as he struggles with the unseen creature fighting him from below. Immediately, a crowd gathers. The boredom is shattered. This is live entertainment, a drama unfolding in real time. Men shout advice, place small wagers on the size of the catch, and offer encouragement. The fisherman plays the line, letting it out as the fish makes a powerful run, then reeling it in, hand over fist. When the creature tires, it is a battle of strength and endurance. After a long struggle, the fish begins to surface. You see a flash of silver deep in the blue water, getting larger and larger. With a final, collective heave, the crew helps to haul the catch over the railing and onto the deck. It is a magnificent tuna, 4 feet long, its powerful body thrashing on the wooden planks. The cheer that goes up is universal and ecstatic. This is more than just a fish. It is a victory. It is a fresh meal that was anti-planned, a gift from the sea. It is a break in the monotony of the salted and preserved rations. The cook, Silas, appears with a knife and a grin. He will prepare this tonight. The thought of fresh, grilled fish steaks is enough to make your mouth water. One of the more peculiar and little-known fishing targets for sailors was the shark. While not considered a prime food fish, sharks were hunted aggressively for several reasons. Their skin could be dried and used as a coarse sandpaper called shagreen. Their liver was rich in oil, which could be used for lamps. And, of course, their meat could be eaten, though it was known to be tough and have a strong, unpleasant ammonia-like taste if not prepared correctly by soaking it in salt water or vinegar. Killing a shark was also seen as an act of revenge, as sharks were a constant threat to any man who fell overboard. The success of fishing often depended on the ship's location. In the deep, open ocean, catches were sporadic, but in certain areas, the fishing could be spectacular. Sailors knew of places where currents converged or where the seafloor rose, creating rich feeding grounds. The Grand Banks of Newfoundland were legendary for their cod, and the warm waters of the Caribbean unteemed with tuna. Mahi-mahi, often called dolphin fish, though they are not mammals, and bonito. A ship's captain might alter his course slightly to pass through known fishing grounds, understanding that a good catch was a huge boost to crew morale. The academic debate here centers on the actual nutritional contribution of fishing. Was it a significant and reliable part of the diet? Or was it, as some logbooks suggest, a very hit or miss affair that Golden Tea be depended on? The consensus seems to be that it was an opportunistic supplement rather than a staple. For every glorious tuna, there were likely days or weeks of catching nothing but seaweed. Its primary value may have been psychological, the thrill of the hunt, the break in routine, and the communal celebration of a catch were as important as the calories the fish provided. That night, the deck is filled with the incredible smell of cooking fish. Silas has cut the tuna into thick steaks and is frying them in a pan over his fire. Each man gets a piece. You take your first bite. The flesh is firm, flaky, and rich with oil. It tastes of the sea, but in a clean, fresh, wonderful way. It is a world away from the stale, salty taste of preserved cod. It is so good that you eat it slowly, savoring every mouthful, trying to lock the flavor in your memory. You eat your fish, watching the stars come out, feeling the gentle roll of the ship. The camaraderie among the crew is at a high point. The shared excitement of the catch and the shared pleasure of the meal have bonded you together. The ocean, which so often feels like an adversary, has, for one day, been a benefactor. The lines are already being baited and cast out again, trailing into the dark water, full of hope for another lucky catch tomorrow. The good fortune of the fishing expedition and the lingering health benefits from the island stop have created a fragile bubble of well-being. But the ship is a hungry beast, and supplies are always dwindling. The captain decides to make another stop, not at a lush, inhabited island, but at a place marked on his charts as little more than a desolate rocket-tiny, uninhabited islet, notable for only one thing. It is a massive seabird rookery. From a distance, the island looks like it is covered in snow. As you get closer, you realize the white coating is not snow, but a thick layer of guano, bird droppings, accumulated over centuries. The air becomes thick with the sharp, ammoniac smell and the deafening sound of tens of thousands of squawking, screeching seabirds. It is an overwhelming assault on the senses. This is not the paradise you visited before. This is a functional, filthy, and vital resource. The purpose of this stop is twofold. Excellent meat. The boats are lowered, and you wade ashore onto beaches stained yellow and white. The birds a chaotic mix of gannets, terns, and boobies are everywhere. They are nesting on every available ledge, in every sandy hollow, and they have very little fear of humans. This isolated rock is their sanctuary, and they have not learned to see you as a threat. Your task is simple and brutal. You walk through the nesting grounds, gathering eggs. They are everywhere, in massive clutches. You scoop them up by the dozen, filling baskets, buckets, and even your hat. The parent birds swoop and dive at you, screeching their outrage, but they are mostly bluff in noise. They pose no real danger. The eggs are a treasure. They are a perfect package of protein and fat. You bring the first hull back to the ship, and the cook, Silas, gets to work immediately. He cracks a few into his pan. The yolks are a deep, rich orange, far more vibrant than any chicken egg you've ever seen. He scrambles them up, and the crew devours them greedily. They have a slightly stronger, fish-eye taste than the chicken's egg, but no one cares. It is fresh, it is hot, and it is not salted or crawling with weevils. For the next few days, you live on eggs boiled, fried, and mixed into flour to make crude pancakes. It is a monotonous diet, but a welcome one. While some men gather eggs, others are tasked with hunting the birds themselves. This requires little skill. The birds are so numerous and tame that you can often just walk up to them and grab them. It is less a hunt and more a harvest. The sailors focus on the larger, meteor birds, like gannets. The birds are killed, plucked, and gutted on the shore. The work made miserable by the stench and the constant noise. But the bounty of this grim island is limited to birds and their eggs. The experienced sailors in the shore party know to look for other, less obvious sources of food. One of the more peculiar and little-known foods harvested in such places was the gooseneck barnacle. These strange-looking creatures, which look like a fleshy stalk ending in a small, shell-plated claw, cling to the rocks in the splash zone. They are not insects or mollusks, but crustaceans, related to crabs and lobsters. To the uninitiated, they look completely inedible, but the old hands know that if you boil them in seawater, the leathery outer skin can be peeled away to reveal a small, tender piece of meat inside that tastes remarkably like a cross between a clam and a shrimp. The collection of these oddities highlights a key survival skill for sailors, a broadened experimental palate. They had to be willing to try anything. Historians who study the diets of this period often find themselves exploring the blurry line between food and medicine. Many of the four-aged plants and animals were believed to have curative properties. For example, the collection of certain types of seaweed to be boiled into a gelatinous broth was common, thought to be good for the bowels. The academic debate is whether these beliefs had any scientific basis. Was the seaweed broth actually providing trace minerals and iodine that were beneficial? Or was its value purely as a placebo and a source of calories? It has likely a bit of both. Back on the ship, the cook tries to make the seabird meat palatable. The flesh of these birds, whose diet consists entirely of fish, is dark, oily, and has an intensely gaumy, fishy flavor that many find unpleasant. Silas boils the meat for a long time, changing the water several times to try and leach out the oiliness. He then stews it with the last of the wild onions from the previous island, trying to mask the flavor. The result is edible, but just barely. The stringy, dark meat is a poor substitute for the pork and turtle you feasted on before. You eat your portion of the seabird stew, chasing it with a hard-boiled egg. The meal is a perfect reflection of your surroundings, functional, a bit grim, and tasting faintly of fish and desperation. You look back at the chaotic, screeching, foul-smelling island. It is a hideous place, but it has given you life. It has filled your belly and restocked your larder. It is another lesson in the strange economics of the sea, where a desolate truck covered in bird droppings can be, for a short time, the most valuable piece of real estate in the world. You are grateful for it, but you are also profoundly glad to be sailing away. The temporary relief provided by the bird island is fading. The last of the eggs have been eaten, and the barrels of salted bird meat are a grim prospect for the future. The mood on the ship begins to dip again. The hunt for food has been a constant, grinding necessity. But you are, after all, on a pirate ship, and there is another, more direct way to restock the pantry: piracy. For weeks, the horizon has been empty. But then, one afternoon, The lookout test cry rings out, and this time it asks not for land. Sail ho! Instantly, the ship transforms. The lazy, monotonous atmosphere vanishes, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and focused energy. This is what everyone signed up for. This is the core of their profession. The captain is on the quarterdeck, spyglass to his eye. He confirms the target, a merchantman, heavy in the water, plodding along slowly. A perfect prize. The chase is on. Your ship, built for speed and maneuverability, easily begins to close the distance. The men are a whirlwind of activity, checking the cannons, sharpening their cutlasses, preparing grappling hooks. But amidst all this preparation for battle, there is another, equally fervent current of conversation. The men aren't just speculating about gold, silver, or fine silks. They are fantasizing about the merchant ship-esque cargo hold. That they have wine. One man says, his eyes gleaming. Real Spanish wine. Not this rum swill. I'd kill for a wheel of good Dutch cheese. Another mutters, the kind that doesn't fight back. Flour, says a third, almost reverently. White flour, for soft bread. Their daydreams reveal a deep truth about piracy, while the legends focus on treasure chests. The reality was often more mundane. For a crew living on the edge of starvation, a successful raid was as much a grocery run as it was a bank heist. The most valuable plunder was often edible. Your ship fires a warning shot across the merchantman's bow. The vessel, clearly outmatched and not equipped for a real fight, wisely decides to surrender. The grappling hooks are thrown. The ships are pulled alongside each other, and your crew swarms aboard. The resistance is minimal. The merchant crew, terrified, throws down their arms, while the captain and quartermaster deal with the merchant captain and his logbooks. A party of your men, led by the cook, Silas, makes a beeline for the galleon the cargo hold. You follow them, your heart pounding with anticipation. The merchant ship-esque galley is a revelation. It is cleaner, better organized, and, most importantly, better stocked than your own. You see sacks of potatoes and onions. There is a small coop with live chickens. Clucking nervously, there is a barrel that, when opened, reveals not salt horse, but salted butter that is still pale, yellow, and smells fresh. But the real treasure is in the hold. The men pry open crates with their crabbers, whooping with delight at what they find. There are barrels of dried fruit, raisins, and figs that taste like pure sugar. There are casks of Madeira wine and French brandy. There are sacks of coffee beans and loaves of sugar. And then you find the jackpot. Several sacks of fine, white wheat flour and a crate of yeast. This is the most exciting prize of all. While the wine and brandy are being passed around, Silas the cook stands over the sacks of flour with the reverence of a priest at an altar. He runs his hands through the fine, soft powder, soft bread. He whispers, a huge grin splitting his beard. We'll have soft bread tonight. A little-known aspect of these raids is that the pirates often knew exactly what they were looking for. They weren't just randomly grabbing things. They were targeting specific goods. A ship sailing from the Caribbean back to Europe was likely to have sugar, coffee, and rum. A ship sailing from Europe to the colonies might have fine wines, manufactured goods, and, most importantly, high-quality, preserved foods for the wealthy passengers. The pirates were savvy consumers. An interesting point of debate for historians is how much the pirates' own dietary needs influence their choice of targets. Would they bypass a lightly defended but poorly stocked ship in favor of attacking a more dangerous but better provisioned one? It suggests a layer of strategic thinking that goes beyond simply looking for the easiest score. The captured food is transferred to your ship. The chickens are a particular prize, a source of both fresh eggs and meat. The merchant crew is stripped of their valuables and some of their clothing, but they are largely left unharmed. Sometimes they'd be set adrift in a longboat, or their ship would be scuttled. But in this case, the captain decides to let them go. After taking everything of value, your ship is a pirate vessel, not a naval warship. You don't have the men to spare to sail a prize ship back to a friendly port. That evening, a true feast takes place. The mood is euphoric, fueled by the captured wine and the thrill of victory. The deck smells of roasting chicken, but the centerpiece of the meal, the item that brings a hush of reverence over the crew, is the bread. Silas and his mate have been baking all afternoon. Using a makeshift oven they constructed on the hearth, they bring out the loaves. Still warm, they are not perfect, slightly misshapen and unevenly browned, but they are soft. You are handed a piece. You tear it open. Steam rises from the fluffy, white interior. You take a bite. It is light. It is airy. It is chewy. It tastes of almost nothing. Just the simple, honest flavor of baked wheat. And it is the most delicious thing you have ever eaten. It has the taste of civilization, of a life you left behind. It is a reminder that food can be more than just fuel. It can be a source of profound comfort and joy. You devour your piece and eagerly hold out your hand for more, along with every other man on the ship. Tonight, you are not just pirates. You are kings. And you are dining on the finest treasure the sea has to offer. Your enemy is dinner. The ride has transformed the ship. The hold is stocked with luxuries. The men are well fed, and their pockets jingle with a few coins taken from the merchant crew. This success brings a new dynamic to the forefront of shipboard life, the distribution of plunder, and with it, the distribution of food. On a naval vessel or a merchant ship, the hierarchy was absolute, and it was reflected in the food. The captain and his officers dined on bitter fare, often enjoying their own private stock of wine, preserved fruits, and better cuts of meat. The common sailors ate their standard, miserable rations. But this is a pirate ship, and things here are supposed to be different. You are witnessing one of the core tenets of the pirate code in action. Democracy, or at least a crude form of it. Before the voyage began, every man who signed the articles agreed to the principle of shares. The captain might get 2 shares, the quartermaster 1.5, and every other man, from the oldest veteran to you, the newest recruit, would receive 1 full share. This system applied to gold, silver, and valuable cargo. But what about the food? At a gathering on the deck, the quartermaster presides over the division of the spoils. The captured money and a few valuable items are tallied up and allocated according to the share system. But when it comes to the food and drink, a different rule applies. The quartermaster declares that the wine, the brandy, the chickens, the flour, all of it is to be held as common stock, for the good of the entire crew. This was a key element of pirate society, while a man's share of the treasure was his own. The daily sustenance was a communal resource. This prevented hoarding, infighting, and the kind of resentment that festered on more rigidly hierarchical ships. When Silas the cook bakes his soft bread, every man gets an equal piece. When a chicken is roasted, the meat is divided as fairly as possible. When the wine is opened, every man gets his cup. You watch the process unfold. The quartermaster, whose job it is to maintain order and represent the crew as interests, oversees the cook as he portions out the evening meal. Two men who had been arguing earlier are given the task of dividing a roasted chicken. One man cuts it, and the other man gets the first choice of the pieces. It is a simple, elegant system to ensure fairness. A pirate version of I cut, you choose. This egalitarian approach to food is one of the most romanticized aspects of piracy. But was it a reality? Historians are divided. The surviving pirate articles clearly lay out these democratic principles. Accounts from captured sailors, like Captain Charles Johnson's famous A General History of the Pirates, often describe this share system in detail. However, some historians argue that this was more of an ideal than a consistent practice. A strong, charismatic captain could still bend the rules, and factions on favoritism surely existed. The debate hinges on whether the pirate ship was a true floating republic or just a slightly less autocratic dictatorship than a naval vessel. Looking at your crew, you see a bit of both. The system is in place, but the quartermaster's stern glare and the captain's quiet authority are what truly make it work. One of the more unique and little-known food-related rules on some pirate ships was the strict regulation of when and how much a man could drink. While they now had barrels of fine wine, the articles often forbade drinking to excess while on duty or after 8 p.m. The penalty for being found drunk at the wrong time was severe. This wasn't about morality. It was about pragmatism. A drunk lookout or helmsman could endanger the entire ship. The communal wine was a luxury to be enjoyed, but not at the expense of the crew as collective safety and security. You see this in action a few nights after the raid. A young sailor, giddy with success and too much brandy, becomes loud and belligerent during the night watch. He is immediately put in irons by the quartermaster. The next day, he is brought before the crew. His punishment, decided by a vote, is to be given only water, the slimy, nasty barrel water, not the fresh water from the island, for a week. He loses his share of the wine and brandy for the duration. It is a powerful deterrent. The freedom of the pirate life had its limits, and the rules were enforced by the community itself. You eat your dinner of fresh food, a fair and equal portion, and it tastes all the better for it. There is a sense of justice and shared ownership that is entirely absent from the grim, every man for himself atmosphere that scurvy and starvation had created. You are not just being fed. You are partaking in your share of the Commonwealth. It fosters a powerful sense of loyalty and brotherhood. You are all in this together, sharing the risks and, now, sharing the rewards. This communal spirit, you realize, is the pirate's greatest strength. It is what keeps the ship running. It is what turns a random collection of outcasts and misfits into a cohesive and effective fighting force. And it all starts with the simple, revolutionary idea that every man on board deserves an equal piece of bread. The democratic division of the captured food has created a palpable sense of fairness on the main deck. Everyone eats the same bread, the same roasted chicken, the same stew. But, as the days wear on, a quiet suspicion begins to creep into the minds of the crew. Does everyone really eat the same? What about the captain? He takes his meals in his cabin. He doesn't eat it on the deck with the rest of the men, sharing a wooden bench and a tin plate. His food is brought to him by the cabin boy. This separation, which at first seemed like a natural privilege of his rank, now becomes a source of curiosity and mistrust. What, exactly, is on the plate that disappears behind his closed door? The captain of a pirate ship held a complex position. He was elected by the crew and could be deposed by them. He had absolute authority during a battle or a chase, but in the day-to-day running of the ship, his power was balanced by the quartermaster. This delicate power dynamic was often reflected in his personal privileges. or lack thereof, you and the other crew members start to watch the cabin boy more closely. You see him carry a covered platter from the galley to the captain's quarters. Does that platter hold the same portion of stew that you received? Or is there an extra piece of meat? A slightly larger piece of bread? Perhaps he has his own private stash of delicacies from the raid that he didn't declare as common stock. This suspicion is the dark side of pirate democracy. In a system where everyone is supposed to be equal, any sign of inequality is seen as a betrayal. The grumbling starts quietly. The captainess looking well-fed. One man might mutter, "Funny how the best part of the fish never seems to make it to our plates." Another might add, "One afternoon, your curiosity gets the better of you." The cabin boy, a nervous lad of about 15, is carrying the captain's meal. He stumbles on a loose rope, and the platter clatter s to the deck, its cover sliding off. Several crew members, including you, happen to be nearby. All eyes dart to the spilled contents. There on the deck is exactly the same meal everyone else is having. A ladle FUL of the same turtle stew, a hunk of the same soft bread, and a cup of the same wine. There is no secret steak, no hidden delicacy. If anything, the portion looks slightly more modest than what the men on deck received. The captain, it seems, is abiding by the rules. The crew members look at each other, a little ashamed, and quickly help the flustered boy clean up the mess. Well, your captain is an honest one. History tells us this was always the case. The idea of the captain having a special diet was a constant source of friction. One of the more obscure but fascinating perks a captain might have had was related to the internal organs of butchered animals, often called the offal or pluck heart, liver, kidneys. On many ships, these were traditionally the captain's right. They couldn't be preserved, so they had to be cooked and eaten immediately. A little-known dish called lamb-s fry or captain's fry, consisting of sliced and fried liver and heart, was a delicacy reserved for the officer's cabin. The common sailor, eating his salt horse, would have been deeply resentful of the smell of fresh frying liver wafting from the captain's quarters. The debate among historians is how often pirate captains dared to claim these privileges. Did legendary captains like Blackbird or Calico Jack risk the loyalty of their crews for a better dinner? Some accounts suggest they were clever enough to share these delicacies, using them as rewards for favored crew members to build loyalty. Others imply that a captain's private food stash was a common source of the tensions that led to mutinies. A captain who was seen to be eating better than his men was not just greedy. He was breaking the social contract of the ship. You learn that your captain's austerity is a deliberate choice, a piece of political theater. He knows his crew is watching. He knows that his authority rests on their respect. By eating the same food as his men, he is sending a powerful message. I am one of you. I share your hardships. It is a calculated performance of humility that reinforces his leadership far more effectively than any show of privilege could. Later, you see the captain on deck, talking with the sailors, asking about their families, sharing a deal. He is not aloof or distant. He is cultivating his relationship with the crew. You realize that his power doesn't come from a crown or a commission. It comes from the consent of the governed, and that consent is earned, day by day, meal by meal. The incident with the spilled platter puts the suspicions to rest. The grumbling subsides, replaced by a renewed respect for the captain. The communal atmosphere of the ship is restored. You eat your dinner that night with a sense of relief. The system works. The food is fair. The leadership is honest. And for now, all is well. You've learned a valuable lesson about leadership. Sometimes, The most powerful thing a leader can do is refuse to take an extra slice of bread. The captured wine and brandy have been a glorious addition to life on board, but the barrels are not bottomless. As the supply begins to run low, the daily drink ration reverts to its old staple, grog. But now, after tasting fine wine, the harsh, watery rum mixture seems even less appealing. The crew's grumbling, once focused on the captain's imaginary feasts, now turns to the quality of their drink. This is where you learn the story of one of the most famous and misunderstood inventions in naval history, grog itself. It has a tale of practicality, control, and a man with a very distinctive coat. The older sailors tell the story. For decades, the standard issue in the British Royal Navy was a half pint of neat, 80 proof per man, per day. This was a massive amount of alcohol, and the result was predictable: widespread drunkenness, accidents, and a general lack of discipline. The ships were often crewed by men who were half drunk for most of the afternoon. Then, in 1740, a British admiral named Edward Vernon took command of the West Indies fleet. He was a practical, no-nonsense commander, deeply concerned with the health and efficiency of his men. He was also known for wearing a distinctive coat made of geogram cloth, a coarse fabric of silk and wool. This earned him the nickname Old Grog among his sailors. Vernon saw the problems caused by the rum ration firsthand. He issued a now famous order. The daily rum ration was no longer to be served neat. It was to be mixed with a quart of water, split into 2 servings per day, one in the morning and one in the evening, to make the mixture more palatable and, as he believed, to help prevent scurvy. He also ordered that sugar and lime juice be added to the mix. The sailors were, at first, furious. They felt their beloved rum ration had been watered down, which it literally had. They christened the new concoction grog in a mocking tribute to the admiral in the geogram coat who had forced it upon them. They had no idea that his great invention would become the standard drink in the Navy for the next 200 years. This origin story is a well-known piece of naval lore, but there is a little known, dirtier secret to the grog recipe that you learn from your own ship's cook. The addition of water wasn't just about diluting the alcohol. It was also about the water itself. As you know all too well, the ship's water supply quickly became a slimy, foul-tasting, stagnant mess. Mixing it with rum, sugar, and lime didn't just make the rum weaker. It made the disgusting water drinkable. The strong flavors of the alcohol and citrus masked the swampy taste of the water. Grog was just watered-down rum. It was sanitized, flavored, alcoholic pun scum. Pirates, not being part of the official navy, were not bound by Admiral Vernon's order. However, the practice of mixing rum with water was adopted almost universally for the same practical reasons. It stretched the rum supply, kept the crew from being dangerously drunk, and disguised the taste of the foul water. The main difference was in the proportions. A naval grog had a strict water-to-rum ratio. On a pirate ship, the mixture was often at the discretion of the quartermaster, and it might be stronger after a successful raid or weaker when supplies were low. The exact recipe for grog is a subject of some debate among drink historians and enthusiasts. Was the lime juice fresh or preserved? Was the sugar ramus covado or a more refined type? The historical reality is that it was whatever was available. The lime was often the preserved lime cordial, which, unbeknownst to them, had much less effective vitamin C than fresh juice, which is why scurvy continued to be a problem even after grog was introduced. The question of whether the primary motivation for grog was controlling drunkenness or improving health is also a point of contention. Burness on writing stress health, but the immediate effect on discipline suggests that sobriety was the more significant, and perhaps intended, outcome. You watch the cook prepare the evening grog. He holds up a bucket of the foul, greenish water from the cask. He pours it into a large wooden tub known as a grog tub. Then he adds the rum, a scoop of brown sugar, and a splash of the precious sour lime juice captured from the merchant ship. He stirs it all together with a ladle. The resulting liquid is a murky, brownish color. It doesn't look appealing, but it has the social and chemical lubricant that keeps the ship running. The men line up with their tin cups for their ration. The grumbling has subsided, replaced by a weary acceptance. It is not wine, but it is wet. It is alcoholic, and it is theirs by right. You take your cup. The taste is familiar. The harsh bite of the cheap rum, the sweetness of the sugar, the sour tang of the lime, and underneath it all, the faint, swampy ghost of the bad water. You drink your grog and look out at the sea. It is a strange thought that this simple, functional beverage, born of a need to control drunken sailors and disguise putrid water, has become such an iconic symbol of life at sea. It is a testament to the ingenuity and pragmatism of the age. It is not a drink you would choose, but it is the drink you have. And in this world, that is more than enough. The conversation about grog and rum has the old sailors reminiscing about other shipboard drinks, and you learn that rum was always the default. Before the cheap and plentiful rum of the Caribbean took over, the drink of choice for sailors, especially those on English ships, was beer. It sounds like a wonderful alternative. The thought of a cool, malty ale is a tantalizing fantasy compared to the harshness of grog. But the reality, as the old hands explain, was far from idyllic. In the early days of long-distance sailing, in the 16th and early 17th centuries, ships leaving port were loaded with an astonishing amount of beer. The primary reason was simple. Beer was safer to drink than water. The water taken from rivers like the Thames was often polluted and would go bad quickly. The process of brewing beer, which involves boiling the water, killed off most of the harmful bacteria. The alcohol and hops also acted as mild preservatives. For a short voyage, beer was the perfect solution to the hydration problem. Each sailor was allotted a gallon of beer per day, a seemingly huge amount, but it was their primary source of liquid and calories. The problem was that this beer was not the strong, heavily hopped India Pale Ale that would later be developed to survive the long journey to India. It was what was known as small beer, a weak, low-alcohol brew, often made from the second or third runnings of mash from a stronger batch. It was cheap to produce and was considered a staple food item, not a luxury. Its low alcohol content and minimal hopping meant it did not last. On a long voyage, especially one that passed through the warm tropics, the beer would spoil. After a few weeks at sea, the barrels would be tapped to reveal a sour, vinegary, or sometimes slimy liquid that was completely undrinkable. This spoilage was a catastrophic failure of the supply chain, leaving crews without a safe source of hydration. One of the less appetizing, little-known facts about ship-ass beer is that the barrels were often repurposed. A barrel that held salted meat 1 year might be hastily cleaned and used for beer the next. The porous wood would retain the flavors of its previous contents, leading to reports of beer that tasted faintly of salt and old fish. The quality control was, to put it mildly, non-existent. The transition from beer to spirits like brandy and eventually rum was a logistical revolution. A cask of rum contained far more alcoholic punch, and therefore more value as a ration, in a much smaller space than a cask of beer. Rum didn't spoil. It might evaporate a little the angel's share, but it wouldn't turn into vinegar. For navies and pirates alike, making the switch was a no-brainer. It saved precious cargo space and eliminated the risk of the entire drink supply going bad. This shift from a beer and beef navy to a rum and salt pork navy is a key area of study for maritime historians. The debate often revolves around the social and cultural impact of the change. Did the switch from a relatively mild intoxicant like small beer to a potent spirit like rum fundamentally change the nature of shipboard life? Some argue it led to a more violent, less disciplined, and more dangerous environment, directly contributing to the problems Admiral Vernon tried to solve with grog. Others argue that the reliability and morale-boosting power of rum were essential for enabling the long-range voyages that defined the Golden Age of Piracy and colonial expansion. You listen to the stories from a very old sailor, a man who claims to have served on a beer-rationed ship in his youth. He describes the ropey beer brew that had gone bad and developed a thick, viscous, mucus-like consistency, similar to the ropiness of spoiled water. He talks about the sour smell that would fill the hold and the despair of the crew when they realized their primary drink was gone. Grog may be a rascalless drink. The old man rests, wiping his lips with the back of his hand. But it is a faithful rascal. It is always there for you. Dear was a fickle friend. Smiled at you in the English Channel and turned its back on you south of the Canaries. You try to imagine it. The crushing disappointment of tapping a barrel and getting a face full of sour, stinking liquid. It makes you appreciate the murky cup of grog in your hand in a new way. It may not be pleasant, but it is reliable. It is a constant in a world of terrifying uncertainty. The conversation paints a vivid picture of the trial and error nature of survival in this era. They didn't have microbiology or chemistry. They had observation and bitter experience. They learned that beer spoiled and rum didn't. They learned that citrus cured scurvy, even if they didn't know why. Every single item in your meager diet is the result of centuries of hard-won, oft unfatal, lessons. You take another sip of your grog. It is a direct link to that history, a liquid artifact. The switch from beer to rum was just a change in taste. It was a critical technological and logistical step that made your entire voyage, and the whole enterprise of long-distance piracy, passable. It was the solution to a problem that allowed ships to stay at sea for months, pushing the boundaries of the known world and enabling the very age of adventure you now find yourself in. The success of your last raid has worn off. The fine flour is gone. The chickens have all been eaten, and the wine barrels are empty. You are back to the old routine. Salt horse, weevil white biscuits, and slimy water mixed into grog. The misery of the diet feels even more acute now that you've had a taste of better things. You find yourself wondering, why is it this bad? Is it just the difficulty of preservation? Or is there something else at play? The answer, as you learn from a conversation with the ship's carpenter, is a story of greed, corruption, and a deeply flawed system. The carpenter, a man who has spent his life working on underground naval and merchant ships, knows where the food comes from, and he knows that the problem often starts long before the ship ever sets sail. The food supplies for a long voyage, whether for the Royal Navy or a merchant vessel that pirates might later steal from, were sorts through a network of private contractors known as victualler, as pronounced fiddlers. These men were responsible for providing the enormous quantities of hardtack, salted meat, and other preserved goods needed to feed a crew for months or years. It was a lucrative business, and it was rife with corruption. The carpenter explains it with a cynical smile. "You think this salt horse is tough," he says, tapping his tin plate. "That's because the fellow who sold it to the Navy bought the oldest, sickest, most worn-out cattle he could find at market. The kind of butcher on land wouldn't he look at twice. He gets them for a pittance, slaps some salt on them, and sells them to the crown for the price of prime beef." This was the fundamental problem. The victualers, motivated by profit, had every incentive to cut corners. They would use the cheapest, lowest quality ingredients. The flour for the hardtack would be full of gritted weevil eggs. The peas would be the oldest and driest available. The casks for the water and beer would be old, leaky, and poorly cleaned. They developed all sorts of devious tricks. A particularly infamous one, the carpenter tells you, involved the salting of the meat to save money on salt. A contractor might use less than the required amount, meaning the meat was properly preserved and was more likely to rot. To make up for the weight, they would sometimes pack the bottom of the barrels with stones or and before adding the meat and brine. A ship would set sail thinking it had a full supply, only to open the barrels months later and find half of it was inedible meat and the other half was worthless rock. This systematic corruption was an open secret. Sailors complained. Captains wrote angry reports. But the system was so entrenched that little changed. A little-known aspect of this is how the corruption was built into the measurements. For instance, a baker rests dozen is 13, giving a little extra. Naval suppliers, however, were notorious for doing the opposite, ensuring their measurements were as scant as legally possible. Their goal was to provide the bare minimum that would pass a cursory inspection, knowing that the true, rotten nature of their goods wouldn't be discovered until the ship was thousands of miles away. The historical debate here is not about whether this corruption existed. It is well documented in naval records and court-martials, but about its scale and impact. Were the majority of suppliers corrupt? Or was it just a few bad apples? Did this corruption significantly hinder naval operations and contribute to the high mortality rates at sea? The evidence strongly suggests it was a systemic problem that had a profound and deadly impact on the lives of ordinary sailors, weakening them with poor nutrition long before scurvy even had a chance to set in. For pirates, this had a strange, trickle-down effect. When you raided a merchant ship, the quality of the food you captured depended entirely on the honesty of the victualler who had supplied that ship in the first place. The fine flour and good butter you enjoyed were likely from a ship on a premium route with a more reputable supplier. The standard cargo vessel, however, was probably stocked with the same miserable fare you were used to. You weren't just stealing food. You were stealing the end product of an entire economic and logistical chain. With all its flaws, you look down at the piece of salt pork on your plate. You see it now not just as a piece of bad food, but as a historical artifact. Its toughness tells a story of a worn-out animal. Its excessive saltiness speaks of a desperate attempt to preserve low-quality flesh. Its faint, unpleasant taste is the ghost of a corrupt bargain made in a grimy port office months ago. This knowledge doesn't make the food taste any better. In fact, it makes it taste worse. It adds a layer of injustice to the misery. You are not just suffering because of the limitations of 18th century technology. You are suffering because someone, somewhere, decided to make a few extra shillings at your expense. It is a bitter pill to swallow, even when washed down with grog. The food on your plate isn't just bad. It was born bad. The food supplies are in a sorry state. The captured luxuries are a distant, happy memory. What is left is the dregs. The oldest barrels of salt meat, the most questionable-looking cheese, and the biscuits from the very bottom of the sacks, which seem to be more weevil than flour. The line between edible and rotten has become dangerously blurred. In this environment, a new and essential survival skill comes to the forefront: the art of amateur food inspection. Every mealtime becomes a cautious ritual of sensory analysis. The crew, now seasoned veterans in the war against bad food, have developed a series of tests to determine if a ration is merely unpleasant or actively dangerous. You learn to perform this triad yourself, following the lead of the older sailors. First comes the visual inspection. You get your piece of salt meat. What color is it? The usual purplish brown is bad, but acceptable. The greenish sheen, however, is a major red flag. This indicates putrefaction. You see a sailor receive a piece with a distinct green tinge. He doesn't complain to the cook. He knows it is not the cook's fault. He simply walks to the rail and discreetly tosses it overboard. It is better to go hungry than to risk the violent sickness that would follow. The cheese is subjected to the same scrutiny. The hard, orange brown color is normal, but if it is soft, slimy patches or fuzzy spots of blue or black mold, it is treated with suspicion. The rule of thumb is that the hard, dry rind mold can be cut away, but any softness or wetness in the cheese itself means it has gone bad from the inside. Next is the test of touch and sound. This is most famously applied to the hardtack. You take your biscuit and tap it on the table. They sharp, solid clack is the sound of a good, dry biscuit. They dull, soft thud, however, means the biscuit has absorbed moisture from the humid air in the hold. A damp biscuit is a potential home for mold, and it is to be avoided. You learn to break it open and look for the telltale dark, dusty powder of mold inside. Then comes the most important test: the smell. Your nose becomes your most trusted tool. You learn to distinguish between the different varieties of bad. There is the sharp, acrid smell of the rancid butter and cheese, which is unpleasant but generally not acutely dangerous in small amounts. Then there is the sour, vinegary smell of spoiled beer or wine. But the smell you learn to fear most is the sickly sweet, cloying odor of rotting meat. It has a distinctive smell that bypasses your brain and hits you straight in the gut, a primal warning signal that this substance is poison. A little known but fascinating aspect of this sensory analysis was the candle test for butter. When the butter was particularly rancid and its edibility was in question, a sailor might take a small amount and a piece of cotton thread for a wick and try to light it. If it could sustain a flame, it was considered more fat than spoiled milk solids and was sometimes used as a grease for lamps rather than as food. It was a practical test to determine the butter rests highest and best use, which was often not as a foodstuff. The historical debate around this topic is about the crew's level of understanding. Did they know why food went bad? Did they have any concept of bacteria or microbes? The answer is almost certainly no. Their knowledge was purely empirical, based on generations of trial and error. They knew that green meat made you sick, but they would have attributed it to bad humors or putrid vapors rather than bacterial contamination. This is where the line between folk wisdom and early science becomes blurry. They had reached the correct conclusions to eat the green meat for what we would now consider the wrong reasons. You see this folk wisdom in action. The cook opens a new barrel of salt pork, and the smell that emerges is unequivocally foul. He and the quartermaster inspect the top layers. The meat is slimy and discolored. The quartermaster makes a decision. He condemns the entire barrel. The cook and his mate heave it overboard. A painful loss of dozens of meals, but a necessary one to protect the health of the crew. An outbreak of food poisoning could cripple the ship as effectively as a broadside from a naval frigate. You apply these lessons to your own ration. You tap your biscuit. It sounds solid. You break it open. It is crawling with the familiar weevils. But you see no mold. You sniff your piece of salt beef. It has the usual overpowering smell of salt, but not the dreaded sweet smell of decay. It passes the test. You eat your meal. Your senses on high alert with every bite. Is this texture right? Does this taste a little too sour? You have become a connoisseur of decay, an expert in the subtle gradations of rotten ends. It has a grim and necessary expertise. You are no longer a passive recipient of food. You are the final line of defense for your own stomach. The last inspector on a long and corrupt supply chain. Your survival depends not just on your strength or your skill with a cutlass, but on the sensitivity of your nose and your willingness to trust your own senses over the demands of your hunger. The food situation has become a daily exercise in risk management. The stores are low, and what remains is of the worst possible quality. The condemned barrel of pork has left a significant gap in the menu. In this dire landscape, the cook, Silas, is forced to move beyond mere preparation and into the realm of culinary alchemy. He must now use his ingenuity to disguise the taste and texture of decay, creating creative dishes born of pure necessity. This is where the true, desperate artistry of the ship as cook comes into play. His job is no longer just to heat the rations. It is to perform a kind of magic trick, convincing the crew to eat things they would normally throw away. One of the first and most common techniques you see him employ is the heavy use of spices. When available, the raid on the merchant ship yielded a small sack of peppercorns and a jar of cloves. These are now worth more than gold. Silas guards them jealously and uses them with surgical precision. A stew made from meat that is starting to turn, that has a slightly off flavor, is treated with a heavy dose of pepper. The powerful, fiery heat of the spice helps to overwhelm and mask the subtle taste of spoilage. It has a form of sensory mystericatin. Your tongue is so busy dealing with the pepper that it doesn't have time to register the rot. Another classic dish of desperation is the sea pie. This sounds comforting, like a shepherdess pie. The reality is a dense, heavy, layered casserole cooked for hours in the great cauldron. Silas creates it when the meat is particularly tough and stringy. He'll line the bottom of the pot with a thick, soup-based pastry. Then he'll add a layer of chopped up salt meat, followed by another layer of pastry, then more meat, and so on, until the pot is full. He adds a little water, puts the lid on, and lets it steam for half a day. The long, slow cooking process breaks down the toughest meat fibers, making them tender. It also allows the flavors or lack thereof to meld together into a uniform, stodgy mass. It has a way of making the worst cuts of meat palatable by obliterating their original texture. But the true genius of the desperate cook lies in his ability to combine and repurpose. You witness the birth of one such creation. The last of the ship as cheese is now so hard it is practically petrified, and its flavor is incredibly pungent. The men are refusing to eat it. The biscuits are riddled with weevils and dust. Silas takes both. He grinds the cheese into a powder. He smashes the biscuits into crumbs, weevils and all. He then mixes the cheese powder, the biscuit crumbs, the last of the rancid butter, and a little water into a thick, greasy paste. He forms this paste into small, flat cakes and fries them in the slush, the skimmed off fat from the meat boiling. The resulting dish is called dandy funk or sea linkers by the crew. It is a hot, greasy, intensely savory cake. The frying makes it crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. The powerful flavor of the cheese completely masks the rancid taste of the butter and the blandness of the biscuit crumbs. It is a heart attack on a plate, a nutritional nightmare. But it is hot. It is full of calories. And it is surprisingly delicious in a horrifying sort of way. You eat your dandy funk with a strange sense of wonder at the cook's ingenuity. He has taken 3 nearly inedible ingredients and created a 4th, more palatable one. The creation of these desperation dishes is a fascinating area for food historians. The recipes were never written down. They were part of a transient, oral tradition, passed from one cook to another. The historical debate is whether these dishes were common, everyday fare, or rare inventions created only in the most extreme circumstances. The very existence of specific, named dishes like dandy funk suggests they were common enough to have earned a place in the sailor's lexicon. It implies a shared, recurring experience of near starvation across the fleets. One of the most extreme and little-known examples of this culinary recycling was what sailors sometimes did with spoiled meat. If a piece of salted meat was deemed too green or smelly to be eaten directly, it might not be thrown away. Instead, it would be tied to a rope and towed behind the ship for a day or 2. The constant washing in the salt water was believed to cleanse the meat, washing away the surface slime and some of the foul taste. It would then be hauled back in unboiled for an extra long time. This practice sounds appalling, that in a world where every calorie counted, wasting a piece of meat was a greater sin than eating one that was slightly tainted. You watch Silas work, a master of his grim craft. He is a pragmatist, a chemist, and an artist of the unappetizing. He wastes nothing. The water the meat was boiled in becomes the soup base. The fat skimmed off the top becomes the frying medium. The crumbs at the bottom of the bread bag become a thickener. He is fighting a constant battle against entropy, using heat, ingenuity, and the occasional peppercorn to hold back the forces of decay for one more day. His creations are not about taste or nutrition. They are about morale. A hot meal, no matter how strange or dubious its contents, is a powerful psychological boost. It is a symbol of defiance, a statement that even in the face of rotten ruin, you will not give up. You will find a way to make a meal. The cook's clever creations have stretched the last of the rotten supplies. But even his magic has its limits. The final barrel of salt horse has been opened and consumed. The last of the weevil-wide biscuit dust has been fried into Andy Funk. The ship is out of food. The mood changes from one of grim endurance to one of quiet, gnawing fear. The daily routine is shattered. There are no meal times. Because there are no meals, the only ration left is the daily grog, which the men now drink on an empty stomach, making them morose and weak rather than cheerful. Hunger is a constant, physical pain. It is a hollow ache in your belly that sharpens every sense, making the phantom smell of food an agonizing torture. The ship is now in a race against time. The captain pores over his charts, looking for the nearest island, the closest shipping lane, anything. The lookouts are promised a huge reward for the first sighting of land or another sail. But the ocean is vast and empty. Day after day, the horizon reveals nothing but the same mocking blue line. As the days of starvation turn into a week, the crew becomes gaunt and skeletal. Scurvy, which had been held at bay, returns with a vengeance. Men are too weak to climb the rigging. The ship feels like a ghost ship, drifting aimlessly, crewed by listless, dying men. Conversations become sparse, and when they happen, they turn to a dark and terrifying subject. It has whispered at first, a single, horrifying word. Custom, the custom of the sea. This was the grim, unwritten law that governed situations of ultimate desperation. When a crew was starving to death with no hope of rescue, A choice had to be made. To survive, the crew would have to sacrifice one of their own. Lots would be drawn, and the loser would be killed and eaten by his shipmates. This is the darkest secret of the Age of Sail. It was a reality that every sailor knew of and prayed he would never have to face. It was anti-murder in their eyes. It was a last, desperate act of survival, governed by a ritual that was intended to make it as fair as possible. The drawing of lots was crucial. It removed the act from the realm of personal animosity and placed it in the hands of fate, or God. You see the men looking at each other differently. Your shipmates, the men you fought alongside and shared wine with, are now potential sources of sustenance. The camaraderie is replaced by a fearful, calculating suspicion. You find yourself unconsciously sizing up the others. Who is the weakest? Who is the flesh highest? You hate yourself for these thoughts, but the primal, animal instinct for survival is overwhelming your sense of morality. The historical reality of survival cannibalism at sea is undeniable, though it was a rare and extreme occurrence. The most famous case is that of the American whale ship Essex, which was sunk by a whale in 1820, a story that inspired Moby Dick. The survivors, adrift in small boats for months, eventually resorted to the custom of the sea. The accounts of these events are harrowing and have been a subject of intense historical and ethical debate. Was it a necessary evil, a complete breakdown of civilization, or a structured, ritualized practice that preserved a twisted form of order in the face of chaos? The emphasis on the fairness of the lottery in survivor accounts suggests that the men involved desperately needed to believe they were acting according to a code, not simply committing murder. A lesser known, and even more controversial, aspect of this custom was the status of the cabin boy. In some accounts, it was suggested that in the drawing of lots, the cabin boy was often the first to be chosen, or was sometimes excluded from the fair lottery altogether. Being the youngest, the weakest, and the lowest status person on board, he was the most vulnerable. Whether this was a common practice or a slanderous accusation is impossible to know for certain, but it speaks to the brutal realities of the maritime pecking order. On your ship, the tension becomes unbearable. The captain and quartermaster know that if they don't find food soon, they will be forced to enact the custom. Then, one afternoon, the cabin boy, who has become thinned as a rail and is racked with fear, points a trembling finger at the cook's galley. The ship's cat, a lean tomcat that was a prized rat-ter, is missing. Silas the cook is confronted, with tears in his eyes. He admits it. He caught the cat, killed it, and has been secretly eating it for the past 2 days. He couldn't bear to see it starve, he says, and he couldn't bear to starve himself. There is no outrage from the crew. There is only a wave of silent, desperate envy. He found a source of food, and he didn't share. But no one can really blame him. The incident is a breaking point. The captain announces that if no sail or land is sighted by the next day at noon, the lads will be drawn. A heavy, silent dread descends upon the ship. You spend the night in a state of terrified wakefulness. You pray for a sail, for a storm, for anything to save you from the choice you will have to make tomorrow. The hunger is no longer the worst thing. The worst thing is the waiting. You look at your hands, wondering if they will have to perform an act that will haunt your soul forever. The ship is no longer a pirate vessel. It is a floating coffin, waiting for a victim. The sun rises on what might be your last day. The air is still and heavy with unspoken fear. The crew avoids each other as eyes. The captain's promise to draw lots at noon hangs over the ship like a death sentence. Every tick of the sand in the hourglass feels like a step closer to an unimaginable horror. You feel hollow, not just from hunger, but from a deep, soul-crushing despair. Your journey, which began with a hearty meal and dreams of adventure, is ending in a nightmare of grim choices. You climb weakly into the rigging, not for duty, but for a desperate, final scan of the horizon. Your eyes ache from the strain, and the vast, empty blue of the sea and sky feels like a personal mockery. There is nothing, only the gentle swell of the waves and the indifferent sun climbing higher in the sky. Down on the deck, the quartermaster is preparing for the ceremony. He has a small leather pouch and is cutting scraps of parchment. Each man's name will be written on a slip. The ritual is being prepared. The custom will be honored. And then, you see it. At first, you think your mind is playing tricks on you, that the hunger is causing hallucinations. It is a tiny speck, a smudge on the horizon, so small it is almost nothing. You rub your eyes and look again. It is still there. It is a sail. You try to shout, but your throat is dry and your voice is a weak, cracking rasp. Sail. You croak. You try again, summoning every last ounce of your strength. Your entire being focused into a single, desperate cry. S-A-I-L-H-O. The word cuts through the silent dread on the deck like a cannon shot. Every head snaps up to look at you. You point with a trembling hand. The captain, his face a mask of disbelief and hope, scrambles up the rigging beside you, his own spyglass in hand. He looks for a long, agonizing moment. Then he lowers the glass. "Yes, right," he says, his voice thick with emotion. It is a sail. A wave of unbelievable relief washes over the ship. Men are crying, laughing, clapping each other weakly on the back. The quartermaster slowly, deliberately, tips the leather pouch over, letting the blank slips of parchment flutter away in the wind. The custom is banished. Salvation is on the horizon. It is a small Spanish sloop, and it is easily overtaken. There is no fight. The pirates on your ship are too weak for a proper battle, but the sight of your desperate, skeletal crew, armed and wild-eyed, is enough to terrify the Spanish sailors into immediate submission. You board their ship not as conquerors, but as starving refugees, and on their deck, you find the greatest treasure in the world. There is a barrel of water that is fresh and clean. There are crates of oranges, and orange. You stare at it as if it is a giant diamond. It is so perfect, simple, round or buff, vibrant color. Someone hands you one. Your hands are shaking so much you can barely hold it. You struggle to peel it. Your fingers clumsy and weak. The spray from the peel hits your face, and the sharp, citrus scent is so powerful it makes you dizzy. You put the first segment in your mouth. The explosion of flavor is overwhelming. It is sweet. It is sour. It is wet. It is everything your body has been screaming for. The juice is a miracle, washing away the foul taste of scurvy and despair. You eat it slowly, segment by segment, tears streaming down your face. This single piece of fruit is life itself. It is the cure. It is forgiveness. It is the end of the nightmare. In that moment, you finally, truly understand the economics of this world. You've seen men risk their lives for gold and kill for a share of plunder. But you now know that true value is not measured in coins or jewels. The value of a thing is measured by its absence. For a man dying of thirst, a cup of water is worth more than a kingdom. For a man rotting with scurvy, an orange is the most precious object in the universe. This is a truth that historians who study pirate treasure sometimes touch upon. The debate is often about what pirates did with their loot. Did they bury it? Spend it all on drink? The reality for many was that the greatest treasures they ever won were not the ones that made them rich, but the ones that kept them alive for one more voyage. An orange, a barrel of fresh water, a sack of flour, these were the real pirate treasures. Use it on the deck of the captured sloop. The sticky juice of the ore in your hands, and you watch your shipmates devouring the fruit with the same religious reverence. The gaunt, hunted faces are already starting to look more human. The journey has been a descent into a hell of bad food, disease, and desperation. You have seen the absolute worst of what this life has to offer, but you have survived. You hold the sweet, sticky remains of the orange peel in your hand, a talisman of your salvation. You are alive, and for now, that is more than enough. And so, the fever of the voyage begins to break. The immediate, gnawing hunger is gone, replaced by the gentle, satisfying weight of fresh food in your belly. The sharp tang of the orange still lingers on your tongue, a ghost of a miracle. The ship sails on, but its rhythm has changed. It is no longer a frantic race for survival, but a slow, steady journey toward a friendly port, a place to rest and recover. The days grow softer, the nights gentler. You lie in your hammock, the gentle rocking of the ship a cradle now, not a cage. The creak of the timbers above you is a lullaby. The memory of the hardtack, the salt horse, the weevils, it all begins to feel distant, like a story you heard about someone else. Your body is slowly mending, your mind even more so. The bruises on your skin are fading, and the darker bruises on your soul are beginning to heal as well. You are drifting now, not on the merciless ocean, but on the calm, quiet sea of approaching sleep. The sounds of the ship, the whisper of the wind in the sails, the soft murmur of the watch on deck, they all blend into a single, peaceful hum. You are safe. You are full. You are drifting into a deep and dreamless sleep.